Beneath our feet, history isn't resting. It's still struggling to breathe. A bronze hand pulled from a forgotten lakeshore. A temple erased from memory, exiled underground for centuries. Knotted cords speaking a language no living human can read. These are not myths. They are objects you can touch. Artifacts that do not match the timeline we were taught. The deeper we dig, the stranger the truth becomes. Tonight, we enter the black file cabinet of archaeology. The discoveries humanity cannot explain. Let's begin. A tomb sealed not by time but by fire. Herculaneum. A city frozen mid-heartbeat beneath a volcano. And under the ash, something no one expected. Dozens of skeletons. People who never escaped. And someone or something they were trying to hide. Not scattered or in chaos but carefully positioned. As if waiting, watching. Preserved. Almost too perfectly. This isn't Pompeii. This is Herculaneum. The lesser-known twin city that suffered the same fate when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD. But what happened here is far stranger. Archaeologists had always assumed that the people of Herculaneum fled before the destruction reached them. The buildings were intact. Streets still recognizable. It looked like an empty shell. A town abandoned just in time. But in the 1980s, while digging near the old boathouses along the shore, workers uncovered something that shattered that story completely. Human remains. Over 300 skeletons. But these weren't buried deep underground or scattered randomly like victims of a disaster. No, they were lined up in perfect rows, inside stone chambers, just by the sea. Mothers clutching children. Men curled into the corners. Bones still showing signs of sudden extreme heat. Some were fused to the stone. Some skulls exploded from the inside out, likely from the sheer force of the temperature. Their final moments were frozen. Literally. The fire hadn't just consumed them, it sealed them. And this is where the mystery begins. Because the positioning of the bodies didn't make sense. These weren't panicked victims caught in the open. They were sheltered, hidden away. Sheltering in stone vaults, the kind of place you'd expect someone to survive. And yet none of them did. Worse, something about the fire itself didn't match our understanding. When researchers studied the remains, they found evidence of instantaneous vaporization. Flesh, organs, even brain matter gone in a flash. The heat must have been over 500 diffru. And it didn't come from flowing lava. Came from something far faster. Pyroclastic surge. Hot gas, moving at hurricane speeds. But here's the twist. Some remains were charred only on the outside. Others still had traces of soft tissue. Some bones were completely blackened. Others were untouched. The blast behaved selectively. Science had no consistent answer. And then there's the strangest part. Among the charred bones, researchers discovered jewelry, tools, purses filled with coins. It was as if the people weren't trying to flee, but wait for rescue. Some had even packed food. Boats had been spotted offshore in ancient records. Did they know what was coming and still chose to stay, or were they told to? When scientists scanned the chambers using modern imaging, they discovered that the layout of the vaults seemed too organized for a sudden evacuation. The placement was deliberate, as if they'd been instructed to sit and wait. Some chambers even had stacked belongings, neatly arranged. Who organizes their things during an apocalypse unless they thought they were safe, unless someone told them they would be? And that's where this turns from a tragedy into a whisper of something more. There's an old Roman document barely preserved, speaking of a guardian of the shore, a figure stationed in Herculaneum who had the authority to command evacuations. But no record remains of that person. Their name? Gone. Their orders? Lost. But the vaults where the skeletons were found line up exactly with where such a guardian would have gathered people. A central collection point, not chaos organization. And yet they were never rescued. Was it a miscalculation or something worse? Could the people of Herculaneum have been deliberately led into those chambers, told they'd be protected, only to be sealed in by fire? Could someone, for some unknown reason, have chosen to sacrifice them? Because when the volcanic surge hit, it didn't leave a single trace of what lay above. The upper levels of the buildings were vaporized. No wood, no cloth, no roofs. But the vaults stayed, like tombs with the door locked shut. And when modern archaeologists opened them, it felt like disturbing a burial ground that wasn't meant to be touched. Some even reported odd sensations. One researcher wrote that the silence inside the chambers was so complete, it felt deafening. Another claimed he felt watched, even surrounded, despite being alone. Of course, science doesn't deal in feelings, but ancient Rome, it did. To the Romans, fire was a divine force. It could cleanse, it could punish, it could trap a soul. The ritual of immolation was rare, used only for criminals or divine messengers. And here in these chambers you see the echoes of that idea. As if the fire wasn't just destruction, but judgment. Or a message. One body in particular caused confusion. A man found alone, away from the others, wearing armor, holding what looked like a ceremonial blade. No records exist of soldiers being stationed at Herculaneum at that time. Who was he? Why was he alone? Some believe he was trying to protect the others. Others think he might have locked them in. His bones were shattered, not by fire but by pressure. The kind that comes from a collapsing ceiling or a falling door. Could this mysterious figure have been the last to leave, or the last to seal the vaults? Nobody knows, and the mystery deepens with what happened after. For centuries, Herculaneum was forgotten. Unlike Pompeii, which was rediscovered quickly, Herculaneum remained buried in hardened rock. So dense, early explorers gave up. It was only in modern times that the chambers were accidentally opened. And the moment they were, the decay began. The bones, once preserved in perfect condition, started to degrade. Exposure to air caused them to weaken. Tools and jewelry tarnished. Some artifacts simply crumbled, as if the city itself didn't want its dead to be seen. Even now, only a small section of Herculaneum is open to the public. Most of it lies beneath the modern town of Herculano. Digging deeper would mean disrupting homes, streets, lives, and so the majority of it remains untouched. Sealed just like the vaults, just like the mystery. There are no eyewitnesses, no written records, only bones and stone. But they tell a story too strange for a simple disaster. Too organized for chance. Too violent for mercy. Why were those people waiting? Why didn't they run? Why were they sealed in? And why does it feel like we were never supposed to find them? Maybe the tomb wasn't meant to be opened. Maybe the fire was never meant to end. The city that was built in circles. Poverty Point. They say cities are meant to grow outward, roads stretching like veins, structures stacking skyward. But what if a city grew in circles instead? Not expanding, but looping, carefully, deliberately. In the quiet heart of northeastern Louisiana, there is a place that doesn't match the story of civilization that we're often told. A place where the usual rules of history, the ones etched into textbooks and timelines, begin to fall apart. From the air, the site looks almost too perfect to be ancient. Giant concentric ridges form a bullseye pattern across nearly 400 acres of land. They ripple out from a central plaza, not as random formations, but as something deeply engineered. This place is known as Poverty Point, and it is one of the oldest known complexes of its kind in North America, built over 3,000 years ago, before written language was ever carved into stone in that region. Yet strangely, it shows signs of city-scale planning, trade, construction, and cultural sophistication that shouldn't belong to its time. There were no stone temples, no palaces, no pyramids. And yet people came here, thousands of them. They came not only to live, but to trade, to gather, to build in a pattern that still leaves archaeologists stunned. They built earth mounds taller than modern buildings, using nothing but baskets of dirt. Some mounds were shaped into massive bird-like silhouettes, only visible from above. And most curiously, they designed the entire settlement around perfect circular geometry, ridges shaped like an enormous earthen fingerprint, pressed into the earth. But who were these people? They had no metal tools, no domesticated animals to plow their fields, no wheels. And yet the layout of Poverty Point is as deliberate and planned as cities built millennia later, with mathematical precision. Some archaeologists believe it may have served as a kind of spiritual or ceremonial center, possibly the heart of a vast interconnected culture that reached from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. The people who built it may have been traders, spiritual leaders, artisans, maybe all three. Artifacts found at Poverty Point didn't originate in Louisiana. Obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, copper from the Great Lakes, soapstone from the Appalachians. How did these materials end up here, thousands of miles from their source, when the builders had no known method of transportation beyond canoes and footpaths? Even stranger is what hasn't been found. There are no signs of traditional farming, no widespread burial sites, no large dwellings. It's almost as if Poverty Point wasn't meant for daily life at all, but for something else entirely: rituals, gatherings, perhaps celestial alignments. Some researchers believe the ridges and mounds may have been aligned to track the movements of the sun and moon, serving as a kind of observatory. Others believe it was a gathering place for seasonal migrations, a cultural hub where knowledge, stories, and materials were exchanged. And yet, for all its sophistication, it vanished. Roughly around 1100 BCE, the site was mysteriously abandoned, not destroyed, not conquered, just left behind. The people disappeared, the mounds remained. The ridges slowly wore down under the pressure of wind and time, and nature crept back over what was once one of the most complex prehistoric settlements in North America. Why did they leave? There's no clear evidence of war, no signs of natural disaster. Some believe shifts in climate may have altered the landscape or food supply. Others wonder if its purpose simply came to an end. A ceremonial cycle completed, a belief system shifted, and the people moved on, leaving behind only the shapes they carved into the land. When the first European settlers arrived centuries later, they didn't recognize what they were looking at. It just looked like natural hills, grassy undulations in the earth. It wasn't until the 19th century that scholars began to realize this was no ordinary terrain. These were man-made constructions, and their scale was overwhelming. The largest mound, known as Mound A, or the Bird Mound, rises nearly 70 feet tall and stretches the length of several football fields. It was built in a shockingly short time, perhaps under 3 months, requiring an estimated 15 million basket loads of earth. And it was done without pack animals, without wheels, without iron or steel. Just human effort and coordination. What could have driven a society to organize itself so effectively for something so massive? And what was it for? Was it a temple, a monument, a map? Even more unsettling is this. Many of the alignments in the layout of Poverty Point seem to reference astronomical phenomena. Some mounds line up with solstice sunrises and moon phases. Others appear to serve as sight lines for distant stars. It's possible some suggest that the entire city was built to reflect something seen in the sky, a cosmic map pressed into the ground. If that's true, it raises questions about how these people knew what they did with no telescopes, no recorded writing, no known mathematical systems. How did they achieve such accuracy? And more importantly, what were they trying to say? Modern technology, including LiDAR scans and satellite imagery, has helped researchers piece together more of Poverty Point's structure. But the more we discover, the less it seems to follow the rules of its time. It behaves more like a place from a future culture, not a prehistoric one. There is no other known site in North America quite like it. Other mound-building cultures existed. Cahokia, for example, came much later. But none share the radial precision, the trading web, the monumental earthworks done so early. Poverty Point stands alone, and perhaps that's why it feels so haunting. It's easy to walk across the site today and miss its scale. Grass now grows over the ridges. Trees line the edges of mounds. Birds nest where crowds once gathered. The silence there feels deeper than usual, as if the earth remembers something we've long forgotten. Visitors often describe the feeling as dreamlike, like they're standing inside a forgotten pattern that once made perfect sense but now hovers just out of reach. Some even say it feels like the site was meant to communicate, but with who? Was it a kind of message to the stars? A sacred design passed down from some ancestral story? Or was it just the expression of a civilization that didn't need stone monuments to leave its mark? There are theories, of course, some more grounded than others. Some suggest it was a giant calendar. Others see it as a spiritual site, where cycles of life and nature were honored. A few fringe theories even propose contact with lost civilizations or ancient visitors. But in the end, none of them can explain all the questions Poverty Point raises. And maybe that's the point. Some places are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be experienced. Their shapes, their patterns, their presence, their whispers from a past that was just as complex, just as human, and just as mysterious as our own present. They remind us that history isn't always linear, that civilization doesn't always march forward in straight lines. Sometimes it moves in circles. The glyphs that vanished overnight, Ica stones controversy in a quiet corner of southern Peru. The sun falls softly over the desert sands, illuminating the dry and wind-blasted hills that stretch for miles with no end in sight. This is the province of Ica, a place where time itself seems to sit still, where dust hangs in the air like it's waiting for something long forgotten to return. Among this stillness, nestled not far from the famous Nazca lines, there lies a mystery that once threatened to rewrite everything we thought we knew about the history of human civilization. Not with massive structures or buried cities, but with small dark stones carved with images so strange and out of place they seemed impossible. These stones would go on to ignite global debate, spark accusations of hoaxes and conspiracies, and raise a question that still haunts researchers to this day. What if humans walked with dinosaurs? These are the Ica stones. They're not enormous, not precious, not adorned with gold or jewels. And yet what they appear to show is far more valuable than treasure. These smooth andesite stones, dark gray to almost black, fit in the palm of your hand. At first glance they seem ordinary, but under closer inspection, their surfaces tell a story no textbook has ever acknowledged. Carved into their faces are images of prehistoric creatures, detailed surgical operations, ancient star maps, telescopes, even what some claim are scenes of brain transplants and organ transference. The stones first surfaced publicly in the 1960s, though whispers of them go back much further. Peruvian farmer Basilio Achuya began selling the stones to tourists and researchers, claiming he had found them buried in a cave near the Ica River. As more and more were unearthed, the local museum in Ica took notice. And eventually, Dr. Javier Cabrera, a respected physician and academic in Peru, took a deep interest. What began as curiosity for Dr. Cabrera quickly spiraled into obsession. He acquired thousands of stones over several years. Thousands. He studied them, cataloged them, even opened a museum dedicated solely to these mysterious artifacts. He believed they were evidence of an ancient, highly advanced civilization that had predated all others. According to his theory, this civilization had coexisted with dinosaurs, mastered technologies we are only now beginning to understand, and had knowledge of space, medicine, and genetics. The carvings, he said, were not myths or imagination. They were a literal record of a forgotten past. It sounds impossible, and that's exactly what made people nervous. Scientists and skeptics were quick to call it a hoax. They pointed out that Basilio Achuya eventually confessed. He said he had made the carvings himself using a dentist's drill, that he had aged the stones with smoke and dust to make them look ancient. But something didn't add up. When pressed further, Achuya said he only claimed to have made them to avoid legal trouble from selling archaeological artifacts. He later denied making all of them and insisted many were real. The story changed, the tone shifted, and suddenly, nobody could say for sure where the truth ended and where the cover-up began. Because despite the confession, a large number of these stones remained scientifically untested, unexamined, or quietly locked away. And a growing number of researchers began pointing out that the carvings show incredible anatomical detail, especially of dinosaurs. Details that weren't even known to science until decades after the stones were found. Some depictions included features like dermal spines and correct postures that didn't appear in textbooks until long after the stones were supposedly created. How could a poor farmer with no formal education have carved anatomically accurate dinosaurs before the science caught up? It was a quiet question, one not shouted from the rooftops but whispered in academic circles, dismissed before it could spread. But it lingered. Equally curious were the surgical scenes. Some stones show what appear to be heart transplants, brain surgery, and even organ regeneration. One stone shows a figure operating with what looks like scalpels and surgical masks, while another displays a sequence of what might be an embryo transfer. These weren't vague shapes that required imagination to interpret. They were deliberate, methodical, and composed like instruction manuals. Still, most mainstream institutions rejected the idea outright. The stones didn't fit any accepted timeline. Civilizations with that level of medical or astronomical knowledge supposedly didn't exist tens of thousands of years ago, and certainly not ones capable of performing surgeries or navigating space. The AICA stones simply didn't belong. But instead of digging deeper, the scientific world largely turned away. Then something strange happened. The stones started disappearing. Not all at once, not in a dramatic event, but quietly. Museum displays were dismantled. Collections vanished into private hands. The Peruvian government banned the sale of the stones, not to protect their authenticity, but under the classification that they were archaeological artifacts, even while simultaneously calling them fakes. Researchers who had once spoken about them stopped replying to inquiries. The museum founded by Dr. Cabrera still exists, but it stands more like a relic than an active research site. Dr. Cabrera himself passed away in 2001, leaving behind more than 11,000 stones, and a mystery no one seemed willing to pursue anymore. What makes the AICA stones so powerful isn't just their bizarre content, it's what they threaten. They undermine entire frameworks. If they are real, it means rewriting history books, challenging fundamental timelines, and confronting the possibility that humanity's story is far older and more complex than we've dared to admit. And perhaps that's why they were buried again. Not beneath soil this time, but beneath silence. Some researchers have tried to bring the stones back into conversation. In the early 2000s, a few independent labs attempted limited tests on the stones. Some results indicated no signs of modern tool usage. Others claimed inconsistencies. But the truth is, a comprehensive scientific study has never been done. Most universities refuse to fund or associate with such a controversial topic, not because the evidence isn't there, but because it's easier to dismiss it than to engage with what it might mean. So the stones sit, some on dusty shelves, some hidden away in private collections, and others possibly still buried beneath the AICA sands. Waiting for someone to ask the right question again. Waiting for someone to look past the labels of hoax or tourist trick and ask, what if just one of them is real? Just one. That possibility would unravel more than just history. It would shift the very foundation of how we understand the past. In a strange twist, more artifacts like the AICA stones have begun appearing in other parts of the world. Stones with similar carvings, unexplained images, and detailed depictions of long-extinct creatures. From Bolivia to Mexico, and even parts of Turkey, whispers of identical motifs have surfaced. Not as tourist gimmicks, but as buried objects recovered during construction, farming, or floods. Their origins are just as unclear, and again, their existence is largely ignored. It raises the possibility of a broader story, one not confined to a single Peruvian province. What if a global civilization did exist, one far earlier than anything on record, and these stones were merely fragments of their language, their encyclopedias? That idea, of course, still sits well outside the borders of accepted academia. But like many ancient mysteries, the AICA stones don't shout. They don't demand attention. They wait. They rest in darkness, carved in silence. Their images, strange and powerful, seem to whisper across time, not to everyone, but to the few willing to pause, to listen, to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we've forgotten more than we've remembered. And in the quiet corners of AICA, beneath the weight of sun and sand, thousands of stones still wait, carved with secrets, etched with the past, and holding in their weight the question no one dares to answer. What if they're telling the truth? The temple that was carved by shadows, Temple of the Moon. Trujillo. In the desert of northern Peru where the air is dry and the sand seems to whisper secrets through the wind, there stands a temple older than memory. It's not the grandest, not the tallest. It's not carved in gold or wrapped in legend. But here beneath the ever-watching sky lies something far more haunting, a story written in shadows. This is the Temple of the Moon. And it wasn't built for gods, it was built for something else. The Moche people, who lived here between 100 and 800 AD, didn't leave behind written texts. No books, no scrolls, no royal decrees. Instead, they told their story in clay and blood, in murals and offerings, in layers of adobe that still cling together after 15 centuries of silence. Just a few kilometers away is its famous counterpart, the Temple of the Sun, a massive structure of over 140 million adobe bricks. But here, in the Temple of the Moon, we find something even more intimate, a place where rituals unfolded in darkness, where the rising moon cast slivers of light through narrow corridors and shadows danced across the walls like living spirits. Archaeologists weren't sure what they'd find here. When they began their careful excavations, all they had were rumors, fragments, and worn stone. But what they uncovered was unlike anything they expected. Layer upon layer of murals, red, black, ochre, painted in repeating cycles, a god with feline fangs, another with serpents flowing from his head. Somewhere between myth and monster, and more unsettling, beneath those painted walls, they found remains. Sacrificial altars, broken bones, evidence of rituals, timed with the moon. It wasn't just a temple, it was a theater of offerings. Imagine this, a moonless night, torches flicker against the walls, drums pound in a slow primal rhythm. A priest appears, wearing a mask carved from the bones of animals. Behind him, an assistant carries a blade, serrated, bronze, old even then. Below, a crowd watches in silence. No one speaks, no one dares. The ritual begins. The Moche believed the moon was powerful, more dangerous than the sun. While the sun brought crops and warmth, the moon brought tides, storms, and unpredictability. They thought it needed appeasing, feeding, and so as the moon rose, they performed their ceremonies, not out of cruelty, but fear. To them this was balance. The blood of a warrior would protect the fields. The cries of a captive would bring rain. It's chilling, it's beautiful, it's human. One of the most remarkable finds was the discovery of multiple construction layers, each new temple built atop the last. Every few decades they would cover the old murals with fresh adobe, build a new floor, paint new gods, and repeat the cycle again. Over 600 years this process was repeated dozens of times. So when archaeologists began peeling back the temple, it was like turning pages in a book where each chapter was buried beneath the next. A timeline not made of words, but of paint, dust, and ritual. But something changed. Suddenly, the construction stopped, the murals ended, the offerings ceased, and the temple was abandoned. Why? Some say it was a massive El Niño event, floods that devastated their coastal lands. Others believe in internal collapse, political unrest, a shift in power. But the truth? The truth remains as hidden as the final layer beneath the earth. Like so many things in the ancient world, we know how it began, but we rarely know how it ends. As you walk through the temple today, it's strangely quiet. The desert hums softly, but inside, The thick adobe walls block out sound. Feels like time has been paused. There are no electric lights, just the natural light that spills through narrow cracks. The same cracks that lit the ritual centuries ago. A shadow passes across a mural. Was that movement? Of course not. And yet, something about this place makes you question what's alive and what's merely memory. Tourists come here expecting ruins, but many leave feeling something else. A strange weight, an echo in the chest, the sense that the walls remember. Not in words, but in mood, in silence, and sometimes that silence is loud. Why would a civilization pour so much energy into building, destroying, and rebuilding the same sacred site again and again? What did they see in the moon that we no longer see? What truths did they learn through shadow that we've forgotten in the light? The Temple of the Moon may never give us its full story, but maybe that's the point. Some places aren't meant to be understood. They're meant to be felt, in the cool of the stone beneath your fingers, in the dry wind that slips through the cracks, in the hush that falls when you stand before the murals. And in that hush, you hear the whispers, not of gods, not of ghosts, but of people. People like us, who stared up at the sky, saw a shape they couldn't explain, and built a monument, not to celebrate it, but to survive it. The city that was built on salt Hallstatt underground mystery. In the quiet heart of the Austrian Alps, there lies a small lakeside village that seems almost too perfect to be real. Its name is Hallstatt, framed by steep mountains and mirrored in still waters. The town looks like a fairy tale drawn to life. But behind the beauty lies something far older, far stranger, and far enduring than the postcard charm suggests. Long before this place became a tourist's dream, it was something else. A mystery carved in salt. A city built on something buried. And a question that no one can answer. How did ancient people build one of the most advanced underground mining systems in Europe? Thousands of years before modern engineering even had a name. This is not just a town. It's a portal to a civilization hidden beneath the earth. And the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. They say Hallstatt's story begins over 7,000 years ago. But no one truly knows when the salt was first discovered. Maybe it was a dripping cavern, or the scent of minerals in the mountain wind. Whatever the trigger was, it led people deep into the heart of rock. They found white gold, salt. But this wasn't just about seasoning food. Back then salt was life, it preserved meat, kept people alive through winters, gave communities power. It was more valuable than silver in some places. So they started to dig. And what they created defied belief. Beneath Hallstatt, ancient miners carved out kilometers of tunnels, narrow shafts that twist through solid stone, chambers reinforced with wooden beams, some of which are still intact today, after more than 3,000 years. Inside, they left behind not just tools but stories. Wooden ladders, still standing, animal skin satchels, preserved in salt. Human remains, mummified naturally by the very mineral they sought. It's a mine turned time capsule. But here's where it gets even stranger. Modern archaeologists can't figure out how they did it. Some of the tools found were too advanced for their time. Ventilation systems, water drainage, salt extraction methods that resemble much later techniques, and the layout of the tunnels. It's not chaotic, it's designed. Like someone knew the mountain's blueprint before they ever broke ground. How, no one knows. Did these ancient miners learn through trial and error, or were they building on knowledge passed down from somewhere else? Some believe the Hallstatt culture was isolated, but others argue it may have inherited forgotten knowledge. Knowledge that didn't belong to that era. The town above is charming, but it's what lies beneath that haunts you. In 1734, a miner working deep underground uncovered something chilling. The body of a fellow miner, perfectly preserved in salt. His skin was still intact, his clothing recognizable. It was as if he had just laid down to sleep 3,000 years ago. They buried him again with honors. But that body wasn't alone. More skeletons, more artifacts, and more questions. One skull showed signs of healed brain surgery, trepanation. Who operated on him? What tools did they use, and how did he survive? These people weren't supposed to be this advanced. Outside, the snow settles gently on the rooftops. Inside the tunnels, silence, except for the slow drip, drip of mineral water. It echoes like a clock ticking across millennia. Some say you can feel them still, the miners, their presence, their breath, trapped in the salt air. They said the walls whisper at night, but it's probably just the wind through old shafts, probably. Even stranger is what researchers discovered in the burial ground nearby. They expected to find men, strong laborers. Instead they found children, dozens of them, buried with tools, with charm necklaces made of antlers, with small mining bags. Why were children working in the mines? Or were these children symbolic? Was this place not just industrial but spiritual? Some archaeologists now believe the mine may have also served as a ceremonial site. That salt, to these people, wasn't just a resource, it was sacred, a gift from the underworld, a connection to the spirits below. As you walk through Hallstatt today, it's hard to imagine the weight of its past. Tourists take selfies, boats skim across the lake, shops sell trinkets, but below it all, a network of tunnels older than most cities on Earth still hums quietly, and it isn't finished giving up its secrets. Ground-penetrating radar recently detected unknown chambers deeper in the mountain. Some believe they may hold lost tools or writings, or something we don't even have words for yet. The salt still protects, still hides, still waits. And here's a final twist to this mystery. Hallstatt's underground mining system may not be unique. Similar salt mines with unexplained sophistication have been found in Iran, in South America, in Pakistan, even under the Dead Sea. What if they're all connected? What if there was an ancient network, a forgotten science of subterranean engineering, that spanned continents, all tied together by one thing, salt, white gold, the mineral that outlasted empires. The deeper you go, the more the lines blur. Was Hallstatt an accident of history, or was it a clue left behind? A whisper from a world that understood the earth in ways we've forgotten. The city still stands, the lake still reflects the mountains, but beneath your feet, the true Hallstatt sleeps in salt, and it's still dreaming. The pyramid that was hidden in the forest. Kawachi Complex, beneath the vast stretches of the Peruvian desert, where winds whisper across sand dunes and ancient silence presses down like a blanket, lies a site long buried beneath time's slow march. It's not where most expect a city to rise, especially not one of great ceremonial importance. But in the Nazca region, hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten history, rests the Kawachi Complex, a sprawling ceremonial center built not of stone, but of adobe, sun-dried mud bricks that seem to hold the memory of rituals, of gatherings, of things long unspoken. Kawachi is not like the pyramids of Egypt, towering in symmetrical perfection. It doesn't gleam in golden limestone or cut a sharp silhouette against the sky. No, it sits low, crouched into the earth, as if part of the land itself. Its pyramid forms are soft and subdued, weathered by time, almost indistinguishable from the rolling hills around it. To stumble upon it is like discovering the bones of a forgotten god, half buried in the sands. This site, believed to be the spiritual heart of the Nazca civilization, stretches over 370 acres and contains more than 40 mounds and platforms. But unlike cities filled with homes, Kawachi has no evidence of permanent dwellings. No kitchens, no beds, no markets, just temples, ceremonial platforms, and pyramidal mounds. This wasn't a place where people lived. It was a place where people came to remember, to honor, to connect with the divine. Some say it was a pilgrimage center, a holy place where the Nazca would gather during specific times of the year. They brought offerings, fine pottery, textiles, even food, and left them behind, never to be used again. These weren't casual visits. They were sacred encounters. And then, as quickly as they arrived, the people would leave, vanishing into the desert. But why was Kawachi eventually abandoned? Archaeologists believe a series of natural disasters, perhaps floods caused by El Niño, struck the region, and yet rather than rebuild, the Nazca did something else. They ritually buried their sacred city. Layer by layer, they covered the temples with earth, sealing them as if protecting something deep within. The act wasn't one of despair, but of devotion, as if closing the doors of a temple until the gods chose to return. The pyramid at the heart of Kawachi isn't grand in size, but it holds a unique power. It's formed of 7-step terraces, rising above the desert floor like a forgotten altar. Each level, carefully constructed, seems less like architecture and more like a stairway, one not just upward but inward, toward something older, something unspoken. Among the artifacts recovered here are some of the finest textiles ever found in Peru. Colors still vibrant, woven with patterns whose meanings are lost. Painted ceramics bear symbols that echo the Nazca lines nearby, those vast geoglyphs etched into the desert. Hummingbirds, monkeys, spirals, and lines that stretch to the horizon. Some believe Kawachi was linked to the lines, that the people who gathered here used them in rituals, perhaps walking along them in long processions, guided by the stars. There's a strange stillness that surrounds Kawachi. Even now, visitors often describe it as stepping into a dream, or a memory that isn't theirs. The wind doesn't howl here, it whispers. The light doesn't glare, it glows. And the silence, it doesn't feel empty. It feels full, full of stories not yet told, of prayers still echoing beneath the adobe bricks. Lyrically, it's like the desert inhaled a secret and never exhaled again. And what of the people who once gathered here, who painted their faces, who brought offerings wrapped in cloth, who stood on the platforms and spoke to the sky? What did they see when they looked at the stars? What did they believe waited beyond this life? No text remain, no written language to translate. Just the mute testimony of mud bricks and buried artifacts. Kawachi challenges the way we define a city. It had no economy, no homes, no marketplaces, yet it was central, vital, revered. It existed outside the bounds of what we now call practical. It was built for something deeper, for spirit, for connection, for ceremony. Some researchers speculate that Kawachi was the heart of a complex belief system that wove astronomy, ritual, and landscape together into one vast living map. Others suggest that the Nazca engineered water systems and fertility rites based on their readings of nature, timing their gatherings here with celestial events. But these theories remain just that, guesses. The truth remains locked away. And perhaps that is part of Kawachi's enduring allure. It doesn't just exist in space, it exists in mystery, in the shadows between what we know and what we feel. Underneath the layers of dust and time, Kawachi whispers the same question that so many ancient places do. Why did they build this? Why here? Why like this? No civilization builds with such care, such devotion, without reason. Something called them to this place. Something held their attention for centuries. And then just as suddenly, something drove them away. Some say the gods left. Some say the people evolved. Some say disaster forced their hands. But none can truly say what Kawachi meant. Not fully, not deeply. Even the name we use, Kawachi, is not what the Nazca called it. Their word, their meaning has been lost. And so we walk these soft hills, these buried temples, and wonder, what if the purpose of Kawachi wasn't to be understood, but to be remembered, like a song hummed in sleep, like a dream just before waking, like a pyramid hidden in the forest of sand, still holding its breath beneath the stars. The temple that was buried by time. Temple of the Fox. Andes. There's a place high in Andean mountains where time seems to pool in the valleys like mist. You don't arrive there, you drift into it. The roads wind not just through the geography of Peru, but into a different kind of space entirely. Somewhere between the clouds and the centuries, buried under layers of forgotten soil and the whispers of the past, lies an ancient ceremonial site, so mysterious, so quiet in its existence, that most have never even heard its name. They call it the Temple of the Fox. It was once a place of worship, a place of deep ritual, a world shaped not by technology or conquest, but by the rhythm of seasons, the motion of stars, and the gentle pace of water trickling down mountain slopes. For years, this sacred site remained hidden, covered in earth and memory, nearly lost to time itself. It wasn't built to endure the way stone monuments often are, not designed to scream across history. Instead, it lay still, patient, until archaeologists working quietly along the banks of Peru's Nazca region uncovered a ceremonial center over 4,000 years old, making it one of the earliest known temples in the Americas. At first glance, the Temple of the Fox is deceptively simple. A series of stone walls, carefully constructed platforms, and painted murals that barely peek through centuries of weather and decay. But it's only when you sit with it, not just observe it, but listen to it, that its depth begins to speak. In the heart of the structure lies an ancient canal system, where water would have once flowed deliberately, guided not for agriculture, but as a spiritual offering. In Andean cosmology, water was not just a resource, it was a divine force. And here, water flowed with purpose, winding through carved stones like veins through a living body. And the fox, it wasn't a decoration. In ancient Andean mythology, the fox was seen as a messenger between worlds, a creature that walked the edge of forest and mountain, wild yet knowing. In the murals discovered deep within the temple, the fox is painted in profile, elongated, almost stylized, its form reaching toward the heavens as if in mid-speech. To these people thousands of years ago, The fox wasn't just an animal, it was a bridge, a spirit, a translator between the realms of humans and gods. And then silence. No texts, no inscriptions, no clues about why the temple was eventually abandoned. Only earth, dust, and layers of slow decay. Archaeologists have puzzled over its disappearance. Did environmental change drive its builders away? Did a shift in power or belief render it obsolete? Or was it always meant to be temporary, a spiritual seed planted and left to slumber? Even the bones unearthed nearby remain cryptic. Small animal remains, charred offerings, traces of pigments still clinging to stone as if the last rituals happened not millennia ago but just last week. There's something quietly haunting about the Temple of the Fox. It doesn't feel like a ruin. It feels like a memory. The temple is located in a place known today as Buena Vista, near the foothills of the Andes. But even the modern name seems reluctant, like it doesn't want to overwrite the deeper identity that pulses beneath the soil. Researchers who work there often speak of a sensation, difficult to describe, like the site is still watching, still active in some intangible way. You might hear a bird call echo too long through the ravine, or notice that the wind seems to hush when you step across certain stones. It may be imagination, or maybe just maybe it's memory, echoing in a way that our instruments can't detect. It's not hard to see why those ancient people would build here. The views alone are staggering. But it's not just the view that matters. It's the sky. From this place millennia ago they tracked the heavens, the movement of constellations, the rising and setting of celestial bodies. Some of the temple's alignments seem to match solstices, equinoxes, the exact path of the sun on critical days of the agricultural calendar. This wasn't accidental, it was a cosmic map carved into the land. A way to understand time, a way to speak to the sky. That's what makes the Temple of the Fox so remarkable. It wasn't a place to pray for rain or food. It was a way to stay in rhythm with the universe. And yet it didn't survive conquest. It didn't survive colonization. There were no great battles here. No gold-laden tombs, just quiet. It was buried not by war, but by time. Today, very few visit it. There are no grand signs, no gift shops, just a dirt path and a gentle slope that leads to one of the oldest ceremonial structures ever found on this continent. And if you stand very still, if you let the wind move through your shirt and the sound of your breath settle, you might hear something. Not words, not voices, but presence. The kind of presence that doesn't need language to be felt. The fox doesn't speak anymore, at least not in a way we understand, but its story lingers in stone, in water, in the way the temple continues to exist, not as a monument to be marveled at, but as a question waiting to be heard. Why did they choose this place? Why did they align their temple with the cosmos? And why did they leave it behind? These are the questions that remain unanswered, and maybe they were never meant to be answered. Maybe, just maybe, the Temple of the Fox was not built for explanation. Maybe it was built for remembrance, for silence, for connection, and now, thousands of years later, it still does exactly that. It connects us to a past we can't quite see but can still feel. The temple that was guarded by silence. Temple of the Oracle Siwa. There is a place in the western deserts of Egypt where time folds in on itself. A place so remote, even the winds seem to whisper and hush. The Temple of the Oracle at Siwa. A structure lost in the sands for centuries, guarded not by walls or warriors, but by silence itself. Long before maps had names for these lands, long before the Nile had kings, People crossed the endless dunes on foot, guided only by stars, and at the farthest edge of their world was Siwa, a desert oasis so isolated that its existence felt like myth, and at its heart, the temple, a building made of sun-dried stone and forgotten prophecy. The Temple of the Oracle wasn't just a shrine, it was a place of deep reverence. Here voices were said to echo with the future. The Oracle, like Delphi in Greece, would speak in riddles and shadows. Kings and generals would cross continents to hear a single word spoken from its darkened chamber. Even Alexander the Great made the journey. He crossed miles of harsh terrain, risking dehydration and death. Not for gold, not for power, but for an answer, whispered by a veiled priest behind the walls of Siwa. It said that when he entered the temple, the oracle called him son of Zeus. From that moment forward, he believed he was more than a man. He believed he was divine. But the mystery isn't in the legend, it's in the silence that followed. Because after centuries of prophecy, the temple fell quiet. Not destroyed, not erased, simply quiet. No records explain why the oracle stopped speaking. No scrolls describe its final days. The desert swallowed its voice whole, and today, what's left is a crumbling facade, rooms without roofs, shadows without answers. A shell of what once held kings in awe. Archaeologists have tried to uncover its story. They've studied the layout, the elevated sanctuary, the inner chambers, the hidden niches carved with symbols of gods long forgotten. Yet none of it explains why the oracle spoke and then stopped. Some believe it wasn't the temple that changed, but the world around it, that as empires rose and fell, belief systems shifted. The divine lost its voice not because it was silenced, but because no one listened anymore. Others think the silence was chosen, that the oracle saw something terrible, and refused to speak it aloud. Prophecy too dark to share, a future too heavy for words. And then there are those who say the silence was protection, that the desert wasn't hiding the temple, it was guarding it. That the winds were not merely blowing sand, but whispering warnings, because if you stand among the stones of Siwa, if you walk its fractured steps at dusk, you may feel it, the weight of something unspoken. The stillness isn't empty, it's full of voices that never finish their sentences, full of futures never revealed. The architecture itself is different from other Egyptian temples. Less grand, less sculpted, but somehow more sacred. Every block feels placed by a hand with intent. Every doorway feels like a choice. You're not invited in, you're permitted. Some archaeologists noticed that the temple was aligned with stars, that on certain days, light would strike a corner precisely, illuminating a chamber deep inside. Could the oracle have used light as part of the ritual? Could silence have been broken only when the stars aligned? No one knows. What we do know is that the oracle at Siwa influenced history. It shaped the self-image of one of the greatest conquerors the world has ever known. It drew pilgrims from across continents. It survived earthquakes, invasions, and the erosion of time itself, but it did not survive the loss of belief. Because a temple, no matter how strong, needs something more than stone to live. It needs faith. It needs seekers. It needs questions waiting to be answered. And maybe, just maybe, the oracle stopped speaking because the questions became too small. No one came anymore asking about the stars or the fate of nations. They came for treasure or fame or validation. And so the temple closed its mouth. Not as punishment, but as wisdom. because some truths are only given to those who seek with open hearts. The silence then isn't empty. It's waiting for the right question, for the right listener, for the return of awe. And in that way, the oracle still speaks, just not in words. It speaks in wind brushing across ancient stone, in shadows that stretch long and lean across forgotten thresholds, in the pause between your footstep and the echo it leaves behind. It speaks in silence so thick, it becomes sound. And maybe that is the final mystery of the temple of the oracle at Siwa, that its greatest prophecy was never spoken out loud, that its most powerful message was not what it said, but what it withheld. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine yourself standing at its gate, the desert around you, a blanket of gold, the stars watching, silent and still. You step forward, the air shifts, and though no voice is heard, somehow you understand. The oracle has not vanished, it's only waiting. The glyphs that were found in the ice, Otzi tattoo's mystery. And yet, if they were protection from what? The mountains were not kind to travelers. Temperatures could plummet without warning. Avalanches whispered death into deep valleys. And when Otzi was alive, the world was not mapped or tamed. Every step into the unknown. Some researchers believe the tattoos may have marked him as a healer, or someone treated by one. But others wonder if they were warnings. Signs meant to guard his body or soul. A code meant for spirits. A boundary line between this world and the next. But how would such knowledge exist 5,000 years ago? The people of Otzi's time are often imagined as primitive. But the truth is they were sophisticated in ways we still don't fully grasp. His tools, his clothing, his last meal. Everything about his life reveals thought, intention, knowledge. He wore multiple layers of leather and grass, tailored to the alpine climate. He carried a copper axe, the only one of its kind ever discovered from that era. He had a fire-starting kit with flint and dried fungi. He even had a birch bark container to carry embers, meaning he understood how to transport fire itself. This wasn't a man merely surviving. This was a man who understood his world. So what else did he understand that we don't? The glyphs on his body could be keys to an entire system of belief, healing, or memory that's now vanished. The meanings may have been passed from one generation to the next, until one day they weren't. The knowledge faded. The symbols remained, but the language to read them was lost. And perhaps the most chilling part, Otzi wasn't peacefully buried. He died violently. An arrowhead was lodged in his shoulder. He had head trauma. He may have bled to death alone on that mountain. Some scientists believe he was hunted, that whoever attacked him didn't take his belongings, possibly out of fear, maybe because of what the markings meant, or maybe because they believed he was sacred. A man of symbols, of secrets. Even Otzi's stomach tells a story. His final meal included grains, ibex meat, and herbs known for their medicinal properties. A deliberate preparation, not the food of a starving man scavenging for survival, but of someone preparing for a journey or a ritual. The placement of the glyphs aligns strangely with meridians used in traditional Chinese medicine, though separated by vast time and space. Could there have been a lost lineage of healing that predates even the oldest written histories, or was Otzi part of a network of knowledge, now erased from the earth? No other mummy like him has been found with such tattoo patterns. And though tattooing is ancient, the intention behind Otzi's glyphs feels different. They are too quiet, too practical, They lack the flair of art or the ego of self-expression. They feel more like warnings or markers. But markers of what? Pain, power, passage? Even the tools used to create the tattoos have never been found. Were they part of a larger ritual kit? Were they burned, buried, or lost in the snow that day? If this was a medical practice, did it die with him, or was it part of a larger hidden culture that simply vanished? Every question about Otzi opens another, and every answer we find seems to echo with something just beyond reach. Like a language we almost remember. Today, Otzi rests in a climate-controlled chamber, behind glass, studied by thousands. But those tiny black lines on his skin still whisper across 5 millennia. They speak of a world that knew things we've forgotten. A world that saw the human body not as a mystery but as a map. And though we may never fully decode what his tattoos meant, the fact that they remain, that they endured through time, ice, and death, means that someone long ago tried to leave a message. A message that waited in the cold until we were ready to ask. The seal that carried a name, Yediah, son of Isayahu. In the heart of ancient Jerusalem, where stone whispers carry the echoes of kings and prophets, something very small and very powerful was found beneath layers of centuries-old dust. It was no grand monument, no towering wall, not even a hidden chamber. It was just a seal, a tiny lump of clay, roughly the size of a coin, pressed with ancient letters. But within that seal was a name, Yediah, son of Isayahu, a name frozen in time, a fingerprint from the world of scrolls and sandals, a whisper from a man who may have stood in the courts of Judah, whose voice once echoed in palaces, now buried under stone in time. The seal, known as a bulla, was meant for documents. Back then, scribes didn't just sign their name, they pressed it into wet clay. A circle of identity and power. A way to say, this is mine, this is real, this is the truth I stand behind. And somehow, more than 2,500 years later, this seal surfaced during a dig just off the ancient road that once led to the Temple Mount. It had been hidden in rubble, baked hard by the flames that destroyed the city. That same fire which burned scrolls, homes, and memory into ash, had preserved this one small clue, a name, a trace. It's easy to miss how powerful this really is. We're not talking about a myth or a symbol, we're not talking about something that might mean something else. We're talking about a man, Yediah, a real man who lived in Jerusalem in the time of kings and left behind a piece of his name for us to find. But who was he? The name Yediah is rare even in biblical texts. Some believe it may be linked to figures mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, possibly minor scribes, officials, or priests. Son of Isayahu hints that his father's name too carried weight. Isayahu might be a version of Isaiah, a known scribe in the court of King Josiah. If that connection is real, then Yediah was born into status. Someone who had access to royal scrolls, perhaps even to lawmaking itself. Imagine that, a man whose hands once rolled parchment, whose fingers pressed the seal into soft clay. Did he know the words of the prophets? Did he walk past Jeremiah in the streets? Was he among those who witnessed the fall of the first temple? The Beulah doesn't say, but it's silent in the way only ancient objects can be, where the silence makes you lean closer. Here's the strange part. These seals weren't supposed to survive. Clay is fragile. Documents rot. And yet, like so many mysteries of archaeology, the destruction that should have erased history preserved it instead. The fire that raged through Jerusalem during the Babylonian invasion baked the seal, turning it from temporary to eternal. It's as if history, in one last breath, chose to immortalize a name before fading. But why was Udaiah's seal found here, beneath layers of collapse in a building just off the city's main road? Some scholars believe the area was an administrative district. That would make sense. The presence of dozens of other seals, each with different names, some linked to known biblical officials, paints a picture of bureaucracy in motion. This was a place where decisions were made, where letters were sealed and sent, where orders were given. Others, though, wonder if something more personal is buried in this artifact. What if it was dropped in haste, abandoned as the Babylonians stormed the gates, a final act of flight? Or maybe it was never meant to be found again. The Hebrew letters etched into the seal are clear, beautifully preserved. They speak across millennia, shaped by fingers long gone. And yet you can almost see them moving, curving the lines, pressing down gently, lifting the seal back. What would Udaiah think, knowing someone would one day hold his name again? Here's where things get eerie. In the same layer of rubble, other bulli were found, bearing names that match those of royal officials mentioned in the book of Jeremiah. This isn't a coincidence. This is a moment where archaeology brushes against scripture, and the result is silence. Not the silence of doubt, the silence of wonder. Were these the exact individuals Jeremiah condemned? Did they walk the same streets? Did Udaiah know their secrets? It's tempting to turn this seal into a symbol, a piece of religious heritage, a political token, a puzzle piece in a grander theory. And maybe it is. But for now, for the sake of mystery, let's allow it to be what it is, a name. In the ruins of Jerusalem, beneath stones blackened by fire, the seal of Udaiah lay untouched. It had no guards, no inscriptions on stone walls, no monument raised in its honor. But it endured, and sometimes that's all a mystery needs. In the end, maybe the real question isn't who Udaiah was. Maybe the real mystery is why we were meant to find him. The shivelings beneath a sacred pond in Kashmir. The water is still, not a ripple breaks its surface. In a small quiet village in Kashmir, tucked away from the roar of modernity, there is a pond, seemingly ordinary, until you look beneath. Locals say they've always known that when the water level drops during certain seasons, the stones reveal themselves, shaped too precisely, placed too symmetrically, to be anything but deliberate. Hundreds of stone structures lined in formation, round and rising like domes. These are not rocks, these are shivelings, submerged just inches beneath the clear water of Herculaneum. They lie undisturbed, unclaimed by any official record or major excavation. The number varies with every report, sometimes hundreds, sometimes more than 1,000. It depends on who you ask. It depends on how long you're willing to look. No signs mark the place, no signboards, no tourist trails. Only word of mouth, passed from families who've lived here for generations. They'll tell you the shivelings have always been here, that no one knows when they were made or by whom. They are carved directly into the bedrock, meaning they were not placed into the pond. They were uncovered by it. The pond, it turns out, is not natural. Its water collects over time, seasonally, as if the land is attempting to keep a secret submerged. Some researchers believe this might be a ritual site, a forgotten water temple, where devotees once came to pray and submerge offerings. Others suggest it could have been part of an older network of stone carvings, spread across ancient Kashmir. But if so, where is the rest of the complex? When satellite images are examined, strange patterns emerge. Around the pond, the ground shows outlines, curves, lines, paths that seem man-made, but are now covered in layers of soil and vegetation. Could it be that what we're seeing is just the tip of something vast? Attempts to date the carvings have returned no clear answer. The stones are carved from the natural terrain, meaning they can't be carbon dated. And there are no inscriptions, no artifacts, no bones or tools to help build a timeline. But what's perhaps most baffling is the uniformity. Each shivling is nearly identical in size and shape. The precision suggests a mastery of technique, but also intent. This wasn't a random placement or erosion event. This was architectural. Some believe it's a symbolic map like an ancient cosmic diagram, a terrestrial model of a heavenly realm, a massive yantra. Others think it's a burial site of sorts, not for bodies but for prayers, that each carved stone represented a vow, a hope, a loss, frozen in stone and left to the water. Then there's the question of silence. No known texts mention this place. No temple records, no royal decrees, no oral epics. For a site so large, so deliberate, and so symbolically loaded, this absence of documentation is strange. As if someone went to great lengths to forget it or to hide it. Local legends, when asked, whisper of a time when gods walked among men. When the land was a place of direct communion between the divine and the mortal. The shivlings, they say, were not placed for humans. They were offerings to something older, something that left. A few stories go deeper, mentioning an underground chamber. Beneath the pond, they say, is a hollow, a room or tunnel that was once used by sages to meditate in silence. A place where time moved differently. But these are stories. No ground-penetrating radar survey has been done. No team has officially excavated the site. When the water rises, as it does each year, the stones disappear, hidden again. As if nature itself is guarding them, shielding them from being turned into another tourist spot. But for those who have seen them up close, the feeling is undeniable. A weight in the air. A stillness that doesn't feel like absence but presence. Like something is still listening. Could these stones predate organized religion? Are we looking at one of the oldest spiritual carvings in the Indian subcontinent? Or are they remnants of a now-lost civilization, one that lived in deep relationship with the land, with the seasons, with something bigger than belief? Attempts to classify the site have fallen flat. It doesn't match any known template. There's no entrance, no shrine, no human remains. Only the stones. Silent, perfect, repeating. A few fringe researchers suggest the formation may be part of a forgotten energy grid, aligned with magnetic fields or ley lines, but again, no official studies, no funding, no will, and perhaps that's the mystery itself. Why has no one investigated this site deeply? Why is it that even in the age of drones, of satellite surveys, of endless archaeological databases, this place remains anonymous? Perhaps it's too inconvenient, too out of place. Perhaps it doesn't fit the current model of historical development. Or perhaps it's because the stones themselves do not wish to be disturbed. There is something undeniably sacred here, but not in a temple-built sense, not with priests or offerings, but in the raw, unspoken way that silence itself becomes holy. You stand by the edge of the pond, watching the water ripple over carved stone. The air feels heavy, the trees are still, and you get the sense that whatever happened here happened long before the world was ready to write it down. The shivlings beneath the pond remain untouched, and maybe that's how it's meant to be. A mystery not to be solved, but to be honored. The handprint that reached through time. The 4,000-year-old Soul House. In the dim-lit storage of the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, nestled among ancient fragments and forgotten objects, sits a clay house no larger than a loaf of bread. At first glance, it seems like a child's model, or perhaps a broken relic of a miniature shrine. But when curators studied it closer, something odd stood out. Pressed into the clay roof was a single human handprint. Not sculpted, not designed, but pressed, as if someone thousands of years ago, with real living skin, left a mark behind, not just on the clay, but across time itself. What was this tiny house doing with food offerings inside? Why does it a home more than a tomb? And whose hand frozen in ancient mud seems to reach from another world? To understand this, we have to go back. Not just in time, but in meaning. Because the handprint isn't just a curiosity, it's a symbol, a clue, maybe even a message. And the house is something far stranger than it looks. Around 4,000 years ago, during Egypt's first intermediate period, the land was fractured. Central authority collapsed, famine spread, and across the Nile, people buried their dead not with gold or grandeur, but with something humble, something human. They left what are now called soul houses, ceramic models of homes, complete with stairways, courtyards, water jars, bread loaves, and sometimes even dogs and people. These weren't toys, these weren't decorations. They were a kind of bridge, a portable offering place, where the soul of the dead could rest, return, and be nourished. In some of these soul houses, tiny food offerings were placed. In others, channels allowed beer or water to be poured, flowing from the living into the symbolic world of the dead. These were not just containers, they were conversations. Each detail had meaning. Each stair might represent a climb to the afterlife. Each doorway might mark a crossing point. And then there's the hand. Most soul houses are abstract. But this one is different. In this one, unlike the others, the creator pressed their own hand into the clay just before it dried. It wasn't added later. It wasn't an accident, it was deliberate, a gesture, maybe even a ritual. But what did it mean? Some archaeologists believe the handprint was a kind of blessing, an imprint of life meant to accompany the soul into death. Others say it was a claim, a maker's mark, perhaps. Or maybe something more intimate. What if the handprint didn't belong to the maker, but to the mourner? What if this print was goodbye? Imagine a grieving son, sculpting this clay home for his father's soul. Imagine him placing tiny loaves, pouring water, shaping stairs that no one would climb, and at the last moment, pressing his hand gently onto the roof, saying without words, "I was here, I remember you." This house, buried in the earth for 4 millennia, might have been meant as shelter, but today, it is a message in a bottle, a moment of touch, a feeling that survives even when the person is long gone. There's something quietly haunting about handprints. We leave them in paint, in dust, in blood, in clay. They say, "I existed," they say, "I touched this." And when that print is 4,000 years old, it whispers even more. It reminds us that the past wasn't made of myths or gods or statues. It was made of people. Flesh, bone, warmth, grief, memory. In the Soul House, archaeologists found traces of red ochre, used as a symbolic coloring, the same pigment once used to paint walls of tombs, to mark bodies for burial, to call back the blood of life. Maybe the handprint was once painted too. Maybe the fingers were bright crimson, reaching out even in death. And this handprint, this touch in clay, survived dynasties, earthquakes, invasions, theft, and silence. It passed from earth to excavation, from box to museum, from object to mystery. And now, it's here, quiet, small, forgotten by many, but not erased. When we think of ancient Egypt, we think of pyramids, mummies, gold masks. But sometimes the most human story is not in the monuments. It's in a smudge of clay. It's in the shape of a palm. It's in 5 fingerprints, pressed deep by someone who never knew we'd one day look at it and wonder who they were. The Fitzwilliam Museum Soul House is now protected, displayed behind glass. But when the lights dim and the halls grow quiet, it feels less like an artifact and more like a whisper. A quiet echo of hands building something for someone they loved. A gesture that meant, go safe, rest well, I will not forget you. And when you look at it, really look, it's as if the hand reaches back. Kushan Dynasty coins at Ainak Mine. Beneath the dry winds of Afghanistan's rugged hills, past the scattered ruins that whisper of forgotten kings, there lies a place few have heard of, and even fewer have seen up close, the Ainak Mine. On the surface, it looks like a modern industrial site, a dusty expanse of earth carved open by machines in the hunt for copper. But far below, buried within the silence of the soil, a mystery was unearthed that no historian expected. Long before the mining contracts, long before the drills and heavy trucks, this very land was home to something else. Something older than memory. Beneath the red earth, workers stumbled upon what looked like ancient stonework, walls, courtyards, even staircases. But that was just the beginning. What they found next left archaeologists speechless. Dozens, no hundreds, of golden and silver coins, scattered across rooms like forgotten echoes of another era. All of them bore the same strange markings, the faces of long-dead rulers. Scripts that didn't belong to this time. They were Kushan coins, not just artifacts, but time capsules from a civilization that once ruled vast stretches of Central Asia. The Kushans, a dynasty cloaked in shadow, ruling from the 1st century AD, are still barely understood. Their empire stretched from the borders of the Roman world all the way to the heart of India. They traded silk and spices, they minted coins and gold, and ruled over crossroads where ancient cultures collided. But here's the strange part. The Ainak Mine is not supposed to be a site of Kushan activity. On old maps, their borders stop short of this mountain. And yet here lie the coins. Real, heavy, untouched for nearly 2,000 years. Why? How? Some believe it was a hidden trading outpost. Others whisper about temples buried in the copper-rich stone. Places where gold offerings were made to ancient gods, and where monks once walked in silence. But the real answer is murky, and that's where the mystery deepens. Because right beside the coins were murals. Yes, faded, delicate wall paintings that survived under layers of rock and dust. They showed robed figures, possibly monks, possibly merchants. Some appeared to be seated in meditation. Others were holding scrolls or looking toward the mountains. The style unmistakably Buddhist, but with subtle signs of Hellenistic influence. Greek-like faces, Central Asian hairstyles, a blend of cultures that shouldn't have coexisted, yet clearly did. How did they all end up here, together, in a hidden mountain sanctuary, now blasted open by a modern mine? That's where things become even more unclear. Because just as archaeologists began to explore deeper, just as they began to piece together what might have been a massive Kushan religious complex, the mining resumed. The copper in these mountains is worth billions. The artifacts, to some just stones in the way. Entire chambers were buried again. Sites that might have held the answer to the region's forgotten history, lost once more under machines and dust. And so the coins remain, a clue without a context. How did Kushan coins end up in Ainak? Was this a royal treasury hidden during war? A monastery minting spiritual currency? A forgotten capital of the Kushan Empire that was never recorded in scrolls or etched into maps? Or was this site more than we can imagine? A bridge between worlds, where ancient Greek, Persian, Indian, and Chinese cultures met under one forgotten roof. The coins speak, but only in riddles. Some carry the image of King Kanishk, one of the greatest Kushan emperors. A man who ruled over religious tolerance and vast trade networks. His image, stern and distant, looks out from the worn gold, his hand clutching a spear. Around him, inscriptions not in just one language, but in Bactrian, an ancient dialect written in Greek script. A linguistic mystery of its own. Others depict strange deities. Some familiar, the Buddha, others less so, gods of fire, of storms, of shadows, all woven into one empire's pantheon. What kind of world was this? Some scholars think Ainak was a sacred site, not for one religion but for many, place of learning, a monastery carved into copper mountains, where Buddhist monks, Greek philosophers, and Indian mystics might have crossed paths. But there's no proof, just speculation, because much of what was discovered is already gone. The murals? Many were damaged. The walls? Bulldozed. The coins? Some were collected, others disappeared into private hands. The modern race for copper outpaced the careful hands of archaeology. And yet, the site still hums with mystery. In the early mornings, when the sun rises over Ainak's broken slopes, workers still report odd feelings, like being watched, like walking through echoes. Some say they've seen shapes on the walls, outlines that weren't there the day before. Others speak of cold air drifting through tunnels that should be sealed. And far beneath the dust and cables and steel, the ancient stone floors may still wait, quiet, untouched, preserving secrets that stretch across empires, languages, and time. The coins might seem small, but when you hold one and feel its weight, you're not just touching metal. You're holding a moment from a civilization that knew the stars, the trade winds, and the gods by many names. And in the quiet hum of the mine, where drills dig and engines roar, somewhere in the cracks of forgotten walls, the Kushans may still be whispering. The forgotten Buddhist monastery of Rajagata, beneath the quiet hills of Karnataka, where the wind moves like a whisper, and the soil holds more memories than names, there lies a place almost no one speaks of, a place that once echoed with chants, footsteps, and the soft brushing of cloth over stone floors. But today, it breathes only silence. Rajagata, a name that barely lives on paper, a site that even local history forgets to mention. And yet, under layers of earth, roots and time, it once stood. A Buddhist monastery that now exists only in fragments, if it ever truly existed at all. There are no towering pagodas, no golden statues, no grand gateways like those found in Sanchi or Nalanda. What remains are the ghosts of foundation walls, broken pottery, worn brick pathways, scattered as though a dream had collapsed mid-thought. It was 2014 when the whispers turned real. Farmers, digging in the red soil of this sleepy village near Bengaluru, unearthed bricks, not ordinary bricks, but heavy, ancient ones, bound with the kind of craftsmanship that doesn't belong to any modern hand. Beneath them, the suggestion of rooms. Alignments too deliberate to be natural. Floors that led nowhere, yet told a story too old to ignore. Archaeologists moved in. What they found was nothing short of strange. The layout of the structures matched Buddhist viharas, monastic residences built for monks who followed the teachings of the Buddha, circular stone bases, typical of wooden pillars that once held up meditation halls, fragments of clay lamps, terracotta seals, and oddly, a small sculpted head, calm-eyed and worn, staring upward from the dirt. But here's the thing, there are no records of a monastery in Rajagata. No texts, no royal edicts, no mentions in travelogues, inscriptions, or temple chronicles. It simply appears as though someone built it in secret, lived in silence, and left without leaving a word. A monastery forgotten by both time and purpose. And that's where the mystery begins. Why here? Rajagata lies off the ancient trade routes, far from the political or religious centers of its time. No great rivers run beside it. No legendary sages are said to have lived in these hills. It is ordinary, quiet farmland surrounded by eucalyptus groves and buzzing with insects. But maybe that was the point. Maybe these monks weren't part of any empire. Maybe they were refugees, spiritual or otherwise, who carved a life in seclusion. Or maybe this site was older than we think, a relic of a lost sect, or even a lone teacher whose students chose to stay long after he vanished. And yet, for a place with no history, the soil is strangely talkative. Radiocarbon dating places the structures between the 3rd and 6th century CE. That's roughly the time when Buddhism was declining in the southern parts of India, eclipsed by rising Hindu temples and changing dynasties. But a monastery built during a decline, that's like building a lighthouse after the storm has passed. It raises a quiet kind of question. Were these the last embers of a dying flame? Imagine the scene. A dozen saffron-robed monks, walking barefoot across courtyards, swept with neem leaves. The sound of chanting, echoing off brick walls. Rice cooking over clay stoves. Scrolls being copied by lamplight. Fragile fingers tracing ink across palm leaves. And above them, the heavy stillness of a land that never asked them to come. Centuries pass, the walls fall, the paths blur, the language changes, the rains come, the monastery becomes part of the earth once more, layered under generations of roots, cattle trails, and forgotten prayers. Until one day, a farmer's shovel cuts through time. But this discovery came too late. By the time archaeologists confirmed the significance, much of the site had already been damaged. Plots had been sold, bulldozers had cleared sections, the fragments were fragile, and local authorities struggled to understand the value. Even now, Rajagata remains unprotected. No museum, no heritage tag, no fences. You could walk over its secrets and not even know. And still, it sits there, under sun, rain and shadow, like a book half burned, waiting for someone to remember the language it was written in. Why was it hidden, or was it simply ignored? And if this monastery could disappear from the map so easily, how many more lie beneath fields and forests, waiting to be found? Maybe Rajagata isn't just a forgotten monastery. Maybe it's a reminder that silence isn't always empty, that sometimes the things we leave behind whisper louder than the things we remember. And somewhere, beneath the soil we call ordinary, the past still breathes, not in stories or scriptures, but in the quiet geometry of broken stones, once sacred, now waiting. The fun 1,000-year-old Chanche tomb in Peru. The dry winds that sweep across the Peruvian coast carry more than dust. They whisper stories from 1,000 years ago, stories buried beneath the sand, entombed in silence, and stitched into the fabric of time. Along the arid coastal plains of central Peru, just north of Lima, there once flourished a culture not many outside the region know of, the Chanche people. For centuries, they lived, traded, worshipped, and died along this unforgiving stretch of land. But while their name may have faded from modern memory, their echoes remain. And in the year 2021, one of those echoes stirred again. It began during a routine archaeological excavation. There was no great announcement, no foreboding sign, just a team of researchers carefully digging through layers of soil, sand baked hard by sun and centuries. What they uncovered, however, would make headlines across the world. A tomb, undisturbed, perfectly preserved. A time capsule sealed tight beneath the ground. And inside, the mummified remains of a man, bound in ropes, seated in a fetal position, his face turned away from the world. But this wasn't just another mummy. This was a story frozen in silence, a ritual buried in symbolism, and a mystery that science still can't fully explain. The tomb dates back nearly a millennium to between 800 and 1200 AD, right before the rise of the Inca. At that time, the Chanche civilization was thriving, known for their distinct pottery and complex burial customs. They buried their dead not to forget them, but to keep them close, wrapped in the rituals that meant everything in a world shaped by nature and spirit. And this tomb, it was different. He wasn't alone. Surrounding the man were offerings, ceramic vessels, tools, textiles, and chillingly, the remains of what appear to be several children. Some archaeologists believe they may have been sacrifices, companions sent to join the deceased into the afterlife. But others think they were symbolic representations, or possibly even later additions to the grave. The truth is still debated. But what caught the world's attention was how the mummy had been tied. Unlike Egyptian-style mummification, or even other burials, this man was bound with thick rope, arms and legs curled inward, and wrapped tightly, like something meant to stay sealed. His face was covered, not with gold or masks, but with layers of cloth. His position wasn't one of honor, but something closer to containment. Was he revered or feared? This raises a question researchers still wrestle with. Was this a ceremonial burial of someone important, maybe a priest or spiritual guide? Or was this man being held in place for another reason? Not to honor him, but to prevent him from returning. Across multiple cultures in ancient Peru, there's evidence of burials meant to restrain the dead. Beliefs in spirits, curses, or vengeful souls weren't uncommon. And in some cases, the deceased were even buried with heavy stones placed on their chest. or with their faces covered and limbs bound. It was as if death alone wasn't enough. Something more was needed to keep the balance between the worlds. The Chankay, like many pre-Columbian societies, had an intricate relationship with death. It wasn't an end, it was a passage, a transition, a door. And doors, of course, swing both ways. What makes this tomb even more mysterious is its location. Found beneath the very outskirts of modern Lima, it sat beneath a residential area, buried beneath the feet of people going about their lives, completely unaware of the story beneath them. For centuries, it lay undisturbed. No signs of looting, no damage. Perfectly preserved in the dry coastal climate, hidden in plain sight. Sometimes the earth forgets, other times it simply waits. Inside the tomb, the textile fragments found were unlike anything the excavation team had expected. Vibrant colors had dulled over the centuries, but the patterns remained. Geometric designs, animal motifs, and spirals, symbols that hint at ritual, belief, and maybe even a form of early writing. The Chankay weren't known to be a literate society in the way we define it, but their symbols spoke volumes. Each thread, each line woven into those fabrics may have held meaning, possibly instructions for the afterlife, or stories of the man's life and status. But we don't yet know how to read them, and that's the part that lingers. This idea that the story is there, right in front of us. We just haven't figured out how to listen. The site where the tomb was found has since been protected. Researchers continue to study the artifacts, hoping to find more links, more pieces of the puzzle. The DNA from the mummy is also being analyzed, but answers come slowly, as they always do in archaeology. What we do know is this. The Chankay people were master weavers, careful potters, and deeply spiritual. They believed in honoring their dead, but also in maintaining a balance between the living and the departed. This balance wasn't just emotional, it was literal. Every object placed in a tomb, every knot tied, every symbol sewn into cloth, it all mattered. It was all part of a sacred dialogue with the unseen, and sometimes that dialogue feels as if it's whispering back. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the scene. A desert plain, the wind stirring the dust, a silent team of researchers brushing away centuries, and then the opening of a chamber sealed for 1,000 years. The air that escapes carries the breath of another world, a world where life and death shared the same space, where belief wasn't separated by science, but shaped by it, where every death was a ceremony, and every ceremony was a map to the beyond. In the center of it all, this man, curled, bound, quiet. Who was he? A priest? A shaman? A criminal? A king? Was he honored, or was he feared? Did he ask to be buried this way, or did someone else make that choice for him? We may never know, and that's the strange beauty of it, that something can survive for 1,000 years held in place by earth and time, and still be wrapped in mystery. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones that shout. They're the ones that whisper. They're the ones that wait, buried, just beneath your feet. The Viking ship burial at Osberg. Imagine walking through a green field in Norway. The air is crisp, the sky gray with drifting clouds, and the silence hangs like a soft veil. Beneath your feet, the land hides something ancient, something once meant never to be disturbed. In 1904, in a quiet farm field near Tunsberg, a farmer digging into a grassy mound struck something unexpected. Wood curved, carved and blackened by the soil. What emerged from the earth wasn't just a boat. It was a message from a long-forgotten world. It was the Osberg ship, a full-scale Viking burial, preserved beneath the clay and peat for over 1,000 years. This was not just a vessel of travel. It was a vessel of transition, a tomb designed not to carry warriors across oceans, but to ferry souls across the sea of eternity. At nearly 70 feet long and 16 feet wide, the ship had been masterfully crafted from oak, its intricate carvings still visible even after a millennium in the ground. Its hull seemed to whisper stories of journeys never taken. But what made the Osberg discovery truly haunting wasn't just the ship, it was what lay inside. 2 women had been buried there side by side. One older, one younger. Their bones were incomplete, degraded by time, but their presence lingered. The older woman, estimated to be around 80, was likely of noble birth. The younger, possibly her servant or maybe her guardian in the afterlife. No one knows for sure. No inscriptions, no names, only silence and splinters. Around them were treasures, intricately woven tapestries, wooden sleighs, household tools, and even small animals, sacrificed and buried alongside. These weren't simple grave goods. They were signs of wealth, status, and belief, tools for an afterlife imagined in vivid detail. But why 2 women, and why such an elaborate burial? In Viking lore, women played complex roles, not just caretakers or wives, but priestesses, seers, and keepers of ancestral wisdom. Some believe the elder woman might have been a vulva, a sorceress or shaman, who held deep spiritual power, a figure revered, maybe even feared. The ship itself seems almost ceremonial, its prow ending in a serpent's twist, a snarl frozen in wood. Was it meant to ward off evil, or guide the spirits through the mists of death? There are theories, many of them. Some say the ship was never meant to sail. Its design, they argue, is too delicate, too shallow. Others believe it was once used on rivers or fjords before becoming a burial ship. But no one knows for certain. And the mystery is part of the pull. Imagine the funeral, the ship resting in a torches flickering in the Nordic dusk, mourners dressed in furs and sorrow, chanting maybe quiet weeping, the sound of earth falling onto wood. 1,000 years ago, someone thought this moment was important enough to build something that would last forever. And yet, even in discovery, the Osberg burial holds back its secrets. No weapons were found, no runes to explain. The faces of the women have been lost to time, their names erased by the silence of centuries. Even their skeletons were damaged by the acidic soil, leaving archaeologists with only fragments, and still, they speak. Through every carved ornament, every bone, every thread of fabric, they whisper to us across the ages. After excavation, the ship was taken to Oslo, where it's now housed in the Viking Ship Museum. There, beneath soft lighting and hushed voices, it rests again in silence. Visitors walk around it in awe. They take photos, they read the plaques, but the real story, the full story, remains untold. Perhaps it always will, because what makes the Osberg burial so powerful is not just what it reveals, but what it refuses to say. It is a monument not just to death, but to the unknowable. The ship was buried with purpose, with ritual, with love, maybe, or fear, or both. But it wasn't buried for us. It was buried for someone who lived, who died, and who someone else loved enough to lay to rest with grandeur. And that kind of silence is sacred. So we are left with questions. Who were these women? What did they believe? Where were they going in that ship that would never sail? We do not know. We only know they were sent off into eternity with honor. And maybe that's enough. As you rest now, let the soft lapping of imagined waves carry you with them. Picture the ship gliding silently across an unseen sea, into the fog of myth, where the past and present drift together in quiet harmony. The Lycurgus cup's color-shifting secret in a quiet room of the British Museum. There sits a cup. At first glance, it may seem like a fine example of Roman glasswork, delicate, ornate, masterfully crafted. But under light, something inexplicable happens. The cup shifts its color. In ordinary light, it appears green. But when lit from behind, it glows red, as if the very material is alive, pulsing with ancient knowledge. This is the Lycurgus cup, and to this day, its secret continues to puzzle scientists, archaeologists, and even nanotechnology researchers. It's easy to dismiss a cup. It's just a vessel. But this isn't just any drinking vessel. This is a fun 1,600-year-old Roman artifact, and one of the most baffling examples of ancient nanotechnology ever discovered. The story begins with its origin. Dated to the 4th century CE, the cup depicts the myth of King Lycurgus, the Thracian ruler, who offended Dionysus, the god of wine. The imagery is violent. Lycurgus entangled in vines, punished for his cruelty. But it's not the story etched into the cup that haunts experts. It's how the cup was made. Glass from ancient times was often colorful, yes. Artisans used metal oxides to create blues, greens, and browns. But nothing like this. The Lycurgus cup doesn't just contain color. It responds to light in a way no other known Roman artifact does. It doesn't reflect light in the usual sense. It changes based on how the light hits it, behaving like something created with modern optics in mind. And yet, this was crafted 1,600 years ago. In 1990, researchers from the British Museum and the Department of Energy finally took a closer look. What they discovered was astounding. The glass contains particles of gold and silver, ground down to incredibly tiny sizes, just 50 nanometers across. That's 1,000 times thinner than a human hair. This phenomenon is called dichroism, where a material changes color depending on how light passes through it. And in modern times, it's used in highly advanced applications like laboratory sensors and space instruments. But how did the Romans, who didn't even have microscopes, manage to create this? That's the question no one can answer with certainty. Did they understand what they were doing? Was it luck? Or did some ancient artisan truly discover how to suspend nanoparticles in glass? Think about what this means. It implies a level of control and precision that we weren't supposed to have until the 20th century. These gold and silver nanoparticles are not just scattered randomly. They're distributed throughout the glass in exactly the right balance to produce this shifting effect. Some experts argue that perhaps this was a fluke, that the artisans didn't know the science but simply stumbled upon a method that worked. Others believe that ancient craftsmen had far more knowledge of chemistry and material science than we give them credit for, because the Lycurgus cup isn't alone. Other Roman glass artifacts show traces of nano-sized metals, but none behave like this. None capture light and shadow and turn it into spectacle. None tell a not just with imagery but with color itself. And then comes the real twist. Recent studies suggest that the Lycurgus cup might have had another function entirely. It may have been used as a sensor. Scientists recreated the cup's nanostructure and discovered that when certain substances are introduced, like different liquids or environmental changes, the cup's color shifts subtly. Could it have been used to test the purity of liquids? To detect poison? Was it a kind of early scientific tool disguised as art? We may never know for sure. The cup is, after all, just one artifact. One clue in the vast, darkened corridor of time. But it forces us to ask a question that has no simple answer. How much did the ancients know, and how much of that knowledge has been forgotten? There's something poetic in that. A silent object that speaks through light. A lost science that echoes through color. It reminds us that not all mysteries lie buried under stone or lost in the desert. Some sit behind glass, in plain sight, waiting for us to understand. So next time you walk through a museum, pause, look closer. What seems simple might not be. What seems ordinary could be hiding a truth so strange, it bends the rules of time. Like the Lycurgus cup, crafted by hands long turned to dust, but whispering still through the magic of light. A chalice from the past, a puzzle for the future, and a question no one's ready to answer. Not yet. The fasting Buddha of Gandhara. In the misty valleys that once connected the ancient trade routes of Bactria and India, there lies a quieter story. A creation so haunting, so devout, that even its absence echoes across centuries. The fasting Buddha, chiseled in stone at Gandhara, an intersection of Greek, Persian, Indian, and Central Asian cultures. This statue holds one of history's most silently powerful mysteries. Crafted around the 2nd to 4th century CE, where Buddhism began blending with Hellenistic art, Gandharan sculptors sought to represent the Buddha not in peace, but in agony. He stands emaciated, ribs sunken, his skin tight across bones. His face is still one of equanimity, vast, calm, serene. Yet his body tells a story of starvation. At some point in Gandharan tradition, they sculpted Buddha not after awakening, but during his vow of extreme fasting, a moment of transformation carved in stone. Why is this odd? Because most Buddhist art portrays the Buddha in ideal form, full, peaceful, radiant. Here one sees something else, a man undergoing suffering, a divine figure embracing self-denial, a visual paradox. It's theology in sculpture, a silent lesson in humanity. Central Asia's crossroads were places where ideas met and reshaped each other. The Gandharan sculptors adopted techniques like contrapposto, high relief, delicate curls, clear echoes of Greek statuary, but applied to teachings of renunciation. Why choose to depict spiritual triumph via physical poverty? Perhaps this image appealed to travelers on the Silk Road, those learning the Buddhist path. A Buddha not just of transcendence, but of endurance. A reminder that enlightenment might come not through opulence, but through intentional emptiness. The surviving fasting statues are rare, only a handful remain. One resides today in the Lahore Museum, another in Tokyo. Fragments lie scattered in galleries around the globe. Each one shows a departure from the classical ideal toward realism, and an intimacy we rarely see in ancient art. Yet these aren't anatomical exercises, they're sacred diagrams of renunciation. What drove those ancient artists to wrench divinity into mortal form, into starvation? Some scholars suggest they represent early forms of ascetic veneration, possibly models for repentance, pilgrimage, or devotion. Others believe they were influential in Mahayana Buddhism, an idea of bodhisattvas, enduring suffering for compassion. The fasting Buddha could thus symbolize both denial and devotion, emptiness and empathy. Imagine a traveler in Gandhara wandering past monasteries. He stops and sees this statue, so unblemished in face, yet hollow in body. He feels something shift. He hears not the Buddha's words but his suffering, and in that silence, he understands compassion. Perhaps that's the fasting Buddha. It didn't teach with scripture, it taught with flesh. And here's the deeper mystery. How many statues like this have been lost, destroyed under invasions, melted in temples, hidden beneath new stupas, especially under iconoclasm or foreign zeal? The fasting Buddha we see is already rare, yet we sense its image of compassion through suffering must have resonated deeply in ancient communities. Why preserve his body and starve his form? Modern researchers still debate. Was the fasting figure meant to convey hope or despair, triumph over desire, or the ruin of it? In some accounts, such statues were created to help monks empathize physically. The body speaks, journey, let go, find freedom. The bones show what the mind must release. Slowly, as centuries passed, Gandhara faded into fragmented kingdoms. Its sculptures dismantled, shipped, buried. The fasting form almost disappeared, but its spirit persisted in stories and monastic vows. And then one day someone dug it up, and the silence that surrounded it spoke louder than any scripture. Even now, standing before the surviving statue, one senses a paradox. This is not a hero, nor even a savior in glory, but a sage in sacrifice, a peaceful hunger, and perhaps that is the point. The Buddha didn't just transcend the world, he renounced it. In carving him, artisans taught us something we need to remember, that sacrifice, though painful, can illuminate emptiness. The Buddha stands not to display weakness, but to document the strength of restraint. It is a map of inner distance, a silhouette of internal journey, carved in stone. To this day, scholars can't say how many statues once existed, how many monks prayed before them, how many pilgrims trekked under Himalayan skies to glimpse such a figure. What we do know is this. The fasting Buddha of Gandhara remains one of the most spiritually charged sculptures ever made, and one of the most quietly unsettling. It asks, what must we let go of to truly see? And perhaps the greatest answer sits not in opulence or sacred halls, but in the shadowed quiet of hunger turned sacred, the Venus of Hall of Fels. In the silent caves of southwestern Germany, beneath layers of ice, stone, and ancient dust, lies a discovery that took the world by surprise. Called the Venus of Hall of Fels, this tiny ivory figurine is more than just a piece of prehistoric art. Created at least 35,000 years ago, it's one of the oldest known representations of the human body. Carved from mammoth tusk, its curving shape, the exaggerated hips and breasts, speak to ideas of fertility, beauty, and survival that defy time. To find it in 2008, well before calling ceremonies, before agriculture, before written language, felt like hearing a whisper from a world we cannot truly imagine. The figurine is just a few centimeters tall, but its power is immense. Remove the thousands of years from it, and it might feel familiar, but carry the weight of those millennia, and it becomes uncanny intimate. Women in every age dotted its curves with stories, and archaeologists said, this was art from the Ice Age. Hall of Fells Cave had long been known as a Paleolithic site, filled with tools and carvings. But the moment they pulled this figurine from its sediment, something shifted. This wasn't just an artifact, it was a statement, made by someone who shaped ivory with flakes of stone, fine enough to carve breasts and rounded belly. That someone understood symbolism, they understood form, they had concept, they woman-shaped something, and knew its meaning would endure. But what did it mean to those people? Some say fertility, motherhood, earth goddess worship. Others suggest it was a sex toy, a tool for ritual, a protective talisman, a symbol of belonging. But one thing is certain, it wasn't made to be plain, it was made to be felt. Imagine a group of people huddled around flickering animal fat lamps, Ice Age storms roaring outside. Inside, someone brings out this little sculpture, they cradle it, show it to others, reverence, respect. It wasn't just a shape, it was a shared concept, a shared soul. That concept, passed from hand to hand, built communities. The Venus of Hall of Fells suggests that even then, before cities, before metals, before gods on thrones, humans created art that transcended survival. They carved dreams. The figurine vanished for centuries, only discovered when archaeologist Nicholas Connard and his team sifted through debris. The ivory gleamed, pale against brown soil. They photographed, they marveled, they held their breath, because until that moment, the earliest human-made figurines were dated to later periods. This one shattered that timeline. Dating placed it at least 35 millennia old, more ancient than almost every other figurine known. It shifted the starting line of art history. It forced scholars to rethink what early humans were capable of beyond killing mammoth tusks and making spears. But with new discoveries come new mysteries. The figurine was found broken, the head missing. Did it break in antiquity? Was the head sacred and removed in ritual? Was there more to the statue that we may never see? Fragments of flutes were also found in the same excavations, delicate mammoth bone instruments, combined with the Venus. They suggest an early culture steeped in both art and music. Perhaps rituals involved chanting, drumming and singing as sea-aged wind howled outside their cave, and yet no single text survives to say why they made it. We only hear it through ivory and echoes. Every time researchers study the figurine, they discover new facets, microscopic where patterns suggest it wasn't buried immediately. Perhaps it was passed down, used, held, perhaps it had value beyond burial. Others argue their world was matriarchal, honoring women's bodies as the source of life, but others caution, we're reading modern ideas into ancient contexts. We don't have their language. The figurine remains finite in what it communicates, but infinite in what we project onto it. What still haunts me is this: the Venus of Hall Fells made me realize that desire, maternity, artistry, and self-consciousness existed long before written history. They were not accidental, they predate anything we call civilization. Some replicas have been made for display or comparison. You can compare fingerwear patterns, carving techniques, ivory grain, but none quite match the original aura of discovery. The pale yellow tusk, the fragile waist, the hollow beneath the arms, that touch point where the maker pressed the tusk, that imperfection, that presence. In modern museums, the figurine is displayed under controlled light, behind glass. But you can still trace doubts in its lines, wonder in its spaces, silence in its broken top. And in the silence, we find something more than art, we find connection, because this figurine links us to someone who lived when we were tools in evolution's hand, someone carving myth before myth was recorded. So tonight, let your mind curl around that ivory shape, feel its curve for a moment. Let the wind of Hall Fells blow across your thoughts, and remember, art is ancient, human, eternal, even when civilization sleeps. The Toland man's final meal. In the wind-swept marshes of Denmark, beneath a canopy of mist and sediment, one of history's most enigmatic individuals lay hidden, untouched for centuries, until finally unearthed by peat harvesters in 1950. And with him came an unlikely confession, the last things he ate, just hours before his death. This is the story of the Toland man, a figure so well preserved, so lifelike. He seems to task us with asking deeper questions. Who was he? Why was he buried in a bog, face down? No grave built for him? And perhaps most hauntingly, what did he eat in his final hours? The Toland man was not a king, nor a warrior. He was small in stature, around 5'3", but preserved in such detail that his beard still shows stubble, his eyelashes intact, and his fingertips still soft beneath the peat. His skin appears smooth, almost human, and when placed in a museum case after extraction, people called him modern. But it's not his face that fascinates, it's his stomach. In a rare case of forensic archaeology, scientists carried out a full autopsy. What they found in his stomach has become legendary in archaeological circles. A final meal, a remnant of his death. He had eaten coarse barley porridge, mixed with wild seeds, foraged plants, and perhaps even moss or uncultivated vegetation. Foods available at the edge of winter, before spring green returned. This wasn't luxury. This was survival, sustenance at the edge of scarcity. Small seeds, a few grains of flax, charred remains of celery, a few grains of barley, nothing elaborate but deliberate. Roast grains, drafty air. A hunger, a moment of nourishment, hours before his death. The Toland man was hanged, his noose tightly wound beneath the chin. There were no marks of struggle, no evidence of violence, other than the rope. For centuries, theories about sacrifice and ritual have swirled around his burial. Some researchers believe he was a ritual sacrifice, offered to gods during a perilous season. Others suggest execution for crime or political dissent. The noose may not have been a symbol of punishment. It may have been part of ritual clothing. But consider this. His meal suggests something deeper. He didn't binge on festive food. He didn't eat sweets or elaborate cooked porridge. He ate wild grains and seeds, perhaps collected quickly, maybe regularly eaten by the poor or traveling pilgrims. It speaks of routine, normalcy. Yet for someone about to die, was this resignation a final taste before transcendence, or was it comfort? Imagine a man in the cold pre-dawn, gathering seeds from sparse patches, stirring porridge over peat fire, eating slowly as daylight inches across the peat bog, breathing mist, waiting, not fear, exactly, silence, acceptance. What we eat often tells more than what we say. A child steals fruit from the orchard. A king eats feasts. A prisoner is fed ration bread. And this man who came here voluntarily or by force ate leather porridge for strength, for routine, for last rites. No spices, no fat, no flavor beyond earth itself. The Toland man's stomach became a capsule of time. And it's not the meals of kings we remember. It's ordinary food, pressed into peats of silence, that returns with so much meaning. Extraction of his remains required care. The peat soils preserved soft tissue, rubbery skin, fingerprints. The brain disintegrated, but his last meal remained intact in his belly. What once nourished him was still readable millennia later. This led forensic analysts to reconstruct the diet in detail. They scanned pollen grains, analyzed microfossils, identified seeds with names fragile in memory: knotgrass, wild celery, elder, flax. Some grains were ancient pre-domestic varieties, plants that grew freely before organized agriculture became dominant. Early Neolithic crops may have been rare in that region by the time of Talon Man, so his meal was both old and wild, foods older than rulers, older than tribes. Consider the contrast: he was buried with no tools, no jewelry, it seems nada, only the rope. Yet plants that predated kingdoms fed him in his final hours. The old world of foragers brushed against the late Iron Age. And then the stillness returned. As peat rose over his body, suppressing decay, covering him in acid tannins, turning flesh into what feels like dark leather. For centuries he lay unmoving, unspoiled, quiet, untouched. Then, in 1950, a knife cut a thick chunk of peat, and the world suddenly stared into his face. The Talon Man reminds us that survival is not always heroic. Sometimes it is routine. That death isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, scheduled, deliberate. His final meal burned into the peat becomes a meditation. Food is more than nourishment. Food is identity. Food is time. Could he have been someone's kin, a missing father, a neighbor? We'll never know. There were no inscriptions, no tents of rituals, no scrolls describing the dedication, only the priestly peat and painstaking analysis. Modern visitors still come to Beilskavdal, the region near Silkeborg, to see where he was found. A small church marks the spot, the Talon Man Church. And beneath ancient oak trees, pilgrims leave coins and notes. They leave gratitude. They leave names. Some come for ancestral connection, some for quiet awe, some for the mystery. His final meal, reconstructions say, would have been lukewarm when he hanged. No one knows whether he ate calmly or hurriedly or was forced, but we know this. The food was normal, the death was not. And in that dissonance, existence and disappearance, the real lesson lingers. Tonight, when you drift toward sleep, imagine a simple porridge, warm over peat fire, a bowl given to someone standing at the edge. Then consider that small meal, millions of grains, carried through time, and as you breathe softly in your bed, remember him, the Taloned Man. His silence is not empty. It is a story, one that can never be fully told, but is still being read, grain by word, by those who care to look. The Quipu of Carol, knots that speak across millennia. In the heart of Peru's arid Soup Valley, the ancient city of Carol stands as one of the oldest civilizations in the Americas. Older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than many written scripts. But Carol never produced written documents. Yet evidence shows one extraordinary artifact, the Quipu, a knotted cord system for recording information. Through it, we may hear silent voices from 5,000 years ago. Imagine a culture so early that thought it sufficient to tie knots and strings, to count, to sacred track offerings, to encode rituals, all without carving stone or cracking a seal. That's what archaeologists discovered. Even in Carol's earliest complex, where monumental architecture and amphitheaters rose before Egypt's dynastic era, statistical records may have been kept with knotted ropes, not paper or clay tablets. That discovery cuts across how we define civilization. Because a Quipu isn't writing, but it is counting. It creates communication without letters, almost like knowing language through touch rather than sight. Recent excavations unearthed fragments of knotted strings, deep in layers beneath ceremonial platforms. Some loops cluster in series, each knot tied close, then spaced further apart. These weren't random, they suggest numeric patterns, maybe accounting, perhaps tribute or records of grain, seasons, tribute, or human offerings. What's astonishing, Carroll's earliest buildings date to 3000 BC, placing them firmly in the age of ancient Mesopotamia. Yet Carroll appears never to have invented writing. Instead, they used quipu, portable, flexible, tactile. A living ledger that can be carried, hidden, burned without leaving stone fragments. That may explain why so little has survived. Knotted textiles decay, they vanish. But in Carroll, a world of dry coastal deserts, even fragile cords can endure long enough to reveal their existence. When they're found, they hint at a vibrant system of administration, calculated rituals, and highly organized society, all without a single carved text. Some historians call Carroll the first urban society in the Americas, but it's deeper than roads and plazas. The presence of quipu implies it was also a record-keeping society. Order without script, a civilization that tracked history in loops and threads. Consider how intimate quipu is. You don't read it with eyes, you feel it with fingers. A knot tight or loose reveals subtle meaning. A dangling cord might represent a tribute due, another the month's harvest. Patterns layered outward like branches of memory. Yet in Carroll, scholars can only gather fragments. Cords hanging from ancient platforms. Sacred layers of ritual earth. And there's another mystery. Traditional quipus in later Andean cultures use base 10 systems, reference llama caravans, tribute of maize or gold. But Carroll predates the llama and known maize cultivation. Their quipus may have recorded something else. Sea harvests, fish quantities, salt yields, dates of ceremonies, or intercommunity exchanges. Some researchers hypothesize that Carroll's quipu may be the original model for all later Andean quipu, that they taught the Inca and pre-Inca people how to knot reality into string. That would mean a single culture invented a non-written ledger system that endured thousands of years. But without keys, how do we decrypt it? Efforts to reconstruct meaning from the patterns face huge challenges. There's no bilingual guide, no legend. The knots found in Carroll, so few, might represent only a fraction of a system. Much of the quipu network could have been destroyed or recycled when buildings were built over earlier ones. Yet their presence shakes our assumptions. Civilization doesn't always need letters to record. Can work with code. Can work with knot. To appreciate Carroll's quipu, we must visualize a sacred platform, priests tying cords, a ledger holding months of tribute, seasons of fish, ceremonial guests, a society flourishing before writing's dawn, keeping track through knots tied by careful hands. As you rest now, imagine tracing those cords with your fingers, feeling the tension, the pause, the meaning. No words, just tension, just form. Thousands of years later, the quipu is silent, but it still feels purposeful. It's a knot tied by time, not lost, not erased, just waiting to be heard. In loops, in thread, in memory. The Dead Sea Scrolls' hidden cave in the silent cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea. A hidden cave held secrets bound in time and scripture. A place untouched by daylight for nearly 2 millennia. This is the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls cave. A burial of truth, mystery, and ancient voices that refuse to be silenced. Imagine an arid desert, wind sweeping dust across pale limestone. Back in 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd tossed a stone into a cave's entrance and heard pottery shatter. Inside, he found 2,000-year-old jars wrapped in linen, containing scrolls, fragile, weathered yet readable words that predated most Christian texts, evaded Roman destruction, and resurfaced in a single echo from history. The scrolls are more than ancient writings. They are the earliest manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible, Psalms, prophets, and laws. Many books found here appear centuries before any other version. Some scrolls previously unknown speak of messianic teachings, apocalyptic visions, and rules for a communal sect called the Essenes, a group that lived in isolation at the Dead Sea's edge. But their discovery wasn't glorious. It was quiet, surreal, a fragment of sacredness abandoned in darkness, now unearthed. Step into Cave 1 and you step into a library lost in silence. These scrolls spent centuries in near-perfect preservation, because the cave was sealed, not by intention, but by time, birth, and neglect, until a wandering goat and a fallen jar revealed their existence. As researchers worked to recover each fragment, sometimes smaller than a thumb, the fragments formed a larger puzzle. Some scrolls were intact, others were incomplete, all written on parchment, animal hides or papyrus, all in Hebrew, Aramaic, and some in Greek. The most famous, the Great Isaiah Scroll, nearly complete, tells of prophecies written centuries before Jesus, and yet remains stunningly accurate compared to modern Hebrew texts. The find challenged scholars. This wasn't just history, it was calibration. A timestamp proving how much ancient scripture endured before human hands intervened or censored. But the cave itself is another mystery. Cave 1 was one of more than a dozen caves used to hide these texts. Many are still unexcavated, or so shrouded in sand and fear that no one dares dig. Local legend warns of curses, of scrolls buried in caves that collapse when disturbed. Scholars traveled from Europe, the US, and Jerusalem to photograph these scrolls, translate them, preserve them, but the sheer volume, some 900 documents, created gridlock. The Egyptian papyri of thousands of years ago seemed simpler in comparison. Handling the scrolls was dangerous. Many were brittle. They flaked as scholars unrolled them. Some fell apart mid-translation. Later, infrared photography revealed hidden text. Carbon dating placed them between 300 BCE and 70 CE, encompassing the destruction of the Second Temple. What we see on those scrolls is a society grappling with identity, law, and eschatology, at a time when the Old Temple stood and then collapsed under Rome's siege. These weren't philosophical treatises. They were expressions of survival, beliefs made law, and community hopes, a mirror to modern human needs. But Cave 1's parting gift, it wasn't a temple scroll or Isaiah alone. It was transitioning belief, the tension of ancient Judaism teetering toward its next transformation. Those cave scrolls teach us that faith and rebellion can be carved in hides and clay, that hidden communities can preserve truths even when civilization marches on. Visiting the Dead Sea today and peering upward at the sandstone escarpments, you don't see caves. But scholars have mapped rugged terrain revealing dozens of small fissures that could still house undiscovered fragments, a whisper away from truth. The scrolls challenge, what if writings we thought destroyed still sleep, waiting for someone brave enough to listen? They remind us, silence buries knowledge, but caves sometimes guard it. So tonight, imagine yourself in that cliff above the Dead Sea, holding a small candlelight, leaning in close to hidden jars, feeling the wind carry dust across ancient beige papyrus. Even broken scroll lines speak. Even voids echo. History isn't always recorded in monuments. Sometimes, It's hidden in caves beneath cliffs, waiting in linen wraps, waiting for the light. The lost temple of the Karkota dynasty, rediscovered in Kashmir. In the misty foothills of Kashmir's Anantnag district, hidden within a sacred spring lies a secret that whispers of kings long gone. They call the place Karkatnag, a boulder-framed pool, where for centuries, gentle waters have carried legends. Until recently, no one knew that beneath a few inches of water and centuries of neglect lay relics from one of Kashmir's most powerful dynasties, the Karkota rulers, whose reign from approximately 625 to 8055 CE was the apex of ancient Kashmiri Hindu civilization. In August 2025, during routine renovation at the spring in Salia village, workers exposed something extraordinary: dozens of stone shivlings, carved idols, and a fragment of a carved pillar. Local elders from the Kashmiri Pundit community spoke of an old temple that once stood beside this pool, a place where rituals were held and kings may have prayed. Swarajya Mag +15 Republic World +15 Ajazra. Da in +15 Wikipedia +15. The Indian Express +15. New Vishwa +15. The spring itself was long considered sacred, but no documented temple existed here. For centuries, the worship was oral tradition, unrecorded. Now suddenly tangible proof. Shivlings carved with deities, figures frozen in stone, placed intentionally in a subaquatic niche. It seemed as if someone had hidden them deliberately, submerged for safekeeping, offering their lives to water's memory. Republic World News Arena. Scholars believe this site likely dates to the Karkota era. The dynasty of Lalitadea Muktapada and others was known for grand temples, the Martin Sun Temple, Amazonian in scale. Yet here, beneath a humble spring, lies perhaps a smaller but deeply spiritual shrine. A temple unseen on any map. A temple silenced. Until now. Balogi +9 Wikipedia +9 KashmiriTours.com +9. Imagine a pilgrim in ancient times. They walk down a path lined with cedar trees, view the mirror-like water as light catches carved stones beneath. They bow over the pool, not knowing whether they are standing on an idol or in holy space. Today, the artifacts have been transferred to the SPS Museum in Srinagar, where they await scientific dating and preservation. But the site remains open, vulnerable. The villagers now guard it, in shifts even overnight, protecting symbols they discovered purely by accident. Balogi +12 Republic World +12 Organizer +12. Some archaeologists believe the idols may have been deliberately buried during centuries of turmoil, possibly to protect them amid iconoclasm or invasion. The pond, with its cool hush, held them safe. The water became a time lock. Organizer +1. At present, no traces of temple foundations or walls stand visible above ground. Only the pool and the stones shaped with devotion. But the findings suggest there is much more below. Maybe a courtyard, an altar, or brick ruins yet to be unearthed. The contrast is profound. A dynasty famed for monumental architecture, left behind colossal temples like Martund, destroyed in the 15th century by iconoclast rulers. KashmiriTours.com +8 Kashmir. Ahead, Balogi. Meanwhile, a smaller string of hushed idols submerged in water survived untouched for over 1,000 years. For the Kashmiri Hindu community, this rediscovery is not just archaeology, it's revival, a connection to heritage nearly erased. murals, temples, and shrines of their faith lost to time. And now, here in a holy pond, buried history has resurfaced. Visiting the spring today, if you step carefully over mossy stones, you can see ghostly outlines beneath clear water, a shiveling's base, a pillar fragment's carving. The air feels heavier here, sacred in silence. The water trembles not in stillness, but in memory. What presses on the mind? What else lies buried beneath the rim? What vanished structures, rituals, or symbols await rediscovery? Will government authorities formally protect the site? Will the temple be reconstructed as locals wish? Or will the sacred idols end up locked behind museum doors, separated from the very spring they once sanctified? For now, the idols remain suspended in water. The pool waits. History breathes slowly. Sometimes the most powerful temples are not large but quiet, not loud, but still visible in reflection. And when a dynasty's legacy becomes myth, it's humble sites like this that prove the myth real. This is the lost temple of a dynasty, remembered in ancient texts, now remembered again, beneath the water, beneath the spring, beneath the silence. The bronze hand of Lake Beale. There are objects that speak, and then there are objects that whisper. They do not shout their secrets. They murmur them, softly, steadily, waiting for someone quiet enough to listen. And deep in the heart of Switzerland, near the still waters of Lake Beale, one such whisper was uncovered. It wasn't found inside a golden tomb. It wasn't surrounded by temples or treasure. No, it lay in the humble earth, buried near a farmhouse, forgotten by the world, until 2017, when archaeologists began to dig and unearth something impossible. A hand, not made of bone or flesh, but forged from bronze, weathered, green with age, just over the size of a human palm. Its fingers carefully shaped, its thumb sculpted to curve inward, and beneath it, a socket, as if it had once been mounted worn. This wasn't a statue, this wasn't a ritual tool, this was a prosthetic. But here's what makes it so strange. It dates back to the Bronze Age, around 1500 BCE, that's over 3,500 years ago. To find something so delicate, so technologically advanced, in such a rural context, it changed everything we thought we knew about prehistoric Europe. No other artificial limb like it has ever been found from that era. No other symbolic hand with that level of craftsmanship. This was not simply a symbol, it was something more. But what? Let's step back. Imagine this part of Switzerland over 3,000 years ago. The villages were simple. Wooden homes, herds of cattle, tribes moving with the rhythm of the seasons. Trading, farming, occasionally fighting, and among them someone wore a bronze hand. But why? Was it a warrior maimed in battle, given this artifact as a mark of honor? Or was it a priest, believed to have healing powers, the hand a sacred tool of ceremony? Or perhaps it was never meant to be worn by a living man? When the team excavated further, they found a grave, a burial. The remains of a middle-aged man, alongside a bronze dagger, a cloak pin, and the hand. And suddenly the mystery deepened. The socket under the bronze wrist wasn't just decorative. It had once been attached, possibly to a wooden shaft or a leather strap. Was it fastened to his arm in life, or was it placed upon him in death? Either way, one thing became clear. The hand wasn't just a tool. It was a symbol of power, of status, of something now long forgotten. There are ancient cultures across the world that revere the human hand. In Egyptian tombs, hands appear in amulets, often as symbols of protection. In Mesopotamia, the hand of Ishtar was a mark of divine favor. Even in Europe, Bronze Age rock carvings often depict open hands in strange, sacred poses. But this was different, because it wasn't drawn, it wasn't painted. It was cast in bronze, poured into a mold, shaped by fire, then engraved by hand. And on it something even more surprising, a small plate of gold, once affixed to the wrist. A glimmering accent that suggests it belonged to someone of extreme importance. So now we're left with the question, was this hand meant for ceremony? Was it a prosthetic for the injured? Or was it a divine symbol made to represent the gods? And why here near Lake Baal, so far from the grand civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, or the Indus? The local tribes had no written language, no monumental cities. Yet this single artifact shows a level of metallurgy and artistic intention that rivals even the great powers of the ancient world. Which forces us to ask, how many other advanced technologies or sacred symbols have simply vanished, buried beneath farmhouses, lost to time, never uncovered? Because if one man in the Bronze Age could wear a bronze hand, carefully crafted, polished with gold, buried in his grave, then what else lies beneath the soil, still waiting, and maybe most haunting of all? Was the hand meant to give him back what life had taken away? Or was it meant to mark him as other, as a messenger, a shaman, a being from somewhere beyond? Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the quiet valley of Lake Baal at sunrise, the mist rolling across the grass, a faint shape standing on a ridge, his cloak billowing, and on his arm, the glint of bronze, his hand, not of flesh, but of fire and metal. He raises it, not in violence but in peace, and the people gathered in silence begin to chant. What did that hand mean to them? We may never know. But one thing is certain, it was never just a hand, it was a message, from a time before time, from a mind long gone, from a man whose name we will never know, but whose hand still reaches out to us. Across the centuries, the ancient storehouse, seals of Jerusalem. In the quiet, sun-baked soil of Jerusalem, archaeologists made a discovery that seemed at first glance so ordinary: small lumps of hardened clay, marked with faint impressions, brittle yet still holding fast against the passing centuries. They were nothing grand, not glittering gold, nor polished stone, but they held a story far more powerful than any jewel. These were storehouse seals, simple yet profound, once pressed into service to guard the great stores of grain, oil, wine, and offerings that passed through the ancient city. These tiny clay tokens, stamped with official marks, were the final guardians of a civilization's lifeblood, the vital resources that sustained its people. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the echoes of merchants arriving at the storehouses, leading lines of donkeys burdened with heavy sacks, their feet stirring the dusty roads. You might imagine the scribe seated behind a low wooden table, leaning forward with a reed pen, recording each delivery in a register now lost to time, each jar or amphora of oil carefully counted and inspected before its neck was tied and sealed. A seal meant security but also trust, a symbol that this product belonged to the temple, the king, or the great administrative offices of Jerusalem itself. These humble lumps of clay, fired accidentally by the same fires that destroyed their cities, survived when papyrus and parchment could not. Their inscriptions remain, fragile letters pressed by a signet ring or cylinder seal, each one a name, a title, a promise of order. The inscriptions might bear the name of a temple priest, a royal administrator, or even a simple steward, names that echoed through the corridors of power, yet whose faces are lost to us. They left behind only these fingerprints in clay, the final trace of human hands reaching out across thousands of years. When you look at these seals, you begin to wonder about the lives connected to them. Who held them last? What pressures and burdens weighed on those who managed the storehouses? Who decided how much grain was set aside for the city, how much for the temple, and how much for the poor? These questions hang in the silent air of museums, where the clay seals now rest behind glass, separated from their ancient world by time, but no less meaningful. These storehouses were more than granaries. They were power itself. Whoever controlled the food controlled life. Whoever held the olive oil controlled light and ritual and commerce. Whoever had the wine had the means to celebrate, to offer, and to seal bonds between leaders and gods. These clay seals were therefore tokens of a deeper contract. One between the people and their beliefs, between administrators and those who depended on them, between rulers and the divine. And when the great fires swept through Jerusalem, fires set by conquerors or sparked by civil war, these storehouse records burned to ash. But the seals, baked hard in that very heat, survived. In their survival, they kept a record that no scroll could preserve. A testament to resilience, to human systems of trust and accountability. As you drift through this thought, you might almost feel the air of that distant time, the smell of olive oil and dusty grain, the sound of amphor jars knocking together, the cautious chatter of workers as they sealed up the precious goods. Picture a scribe with a tired hand, pressing his seal once more into soft clay, before moving to the next. It was routine, yes, but routine with cosmic importance, for the survival of a city depended on these records, these small clay markers that preserved order against the chaos, always threatening from beyond the city walls. And isn't there something profoundly human about that? That even 2,600 years ago, people worried about shortages, worried about thieves, worried about losing what was most vital to their communities. These small lumps of clay stand as mute evidence of that worry, but also of human hope. A hope that if you marked your storehouses carefully enough, you could protect your family, your neighbors, your city, even your faith. In today's world of digital records, where your groceries might be tracked by a barcode or a phone scan, there is a strange familiarity in these ancient seals. We still seal things, still count them, still trust that an unbroken mark means safety, that desire to protect what feeds us, what lights our lamps, what sustains our ceremonies. It has never left us, no matter how many centuries pass. So next time you see an image of one of these storehouse seals, remember the heartbeat behind it. A human heartbeat, worried and hopeful all at once, trying to shield a city's lifeblood from drought, from enemies, from fate. And remember the people, nameless and countless, who stacked jars of barley and jugs of wine in dark storerooms, who pressed those seals into clay and set them to dry in the sun. They too had their hopes and fears, their ambitions and failures, their tiny joys and private griefs, just like you and me. In the quiet stillness of the museum, the storehouse seals speak if you let them. They speak of trust and fear. They whisper of people trying to control what could not be controlled, whether war, time itself. They remind us that the tiniest mark in clay can echo across millennia, more powerful than the grandest monument if you know how to listen. As you settle into sleep, let your mind wander among those long-forgotten storehouses. See the flickering lamplight, Hear the rustle of papyrus as the scribe logs a shipment. Smell the sharp, earthy scent of fresh oil. Watch as a heavy jar is placed in its niche, sealed, counted, made safe. Picture the guardians of these supplies, proud in their small but vital role, knowing they stood between their city and hunger. In that dusty chamber, you might glimpse the moment a boy ran in with news of an approaching army, or a woman paused to offer a prayer before signing her name to the record. These are human moments, caught forever in clay, a snapshot of life at its most fragile and its most hopeful. That is the gift of the ancient storehouse seals of Jerusalem. Not just the survival of a record, but the survival of human intent, the intention to protect, the determination to organize, the wish to keep chaos outside the city walls. It is a gift we can still learn from today, when our systems too stand vulnerable to the unexpected. So as your eyes grow heavy, hold on to that image of a clay seal pressed by a steady hand, a mark of order in a world of uncertainty. Let that memory drift you into peaceful rest, knowing that through all ages, people have tried to guard what matters most. Their clay seals, their tiny voices in history, still whisper softly that no matter how lost or broken our world seems, we have always been capable of protecting the things that feed and sustain us, and that perhaps more than any treasure is the real legacy they left behind.